So hey guys. Welcome back to my channel. This is part 2. What if Naruto was a son of Sirzechs, Lucifer and Grayfia in high school DxD? But before I start, you guys have to use 1000 year of death on the like and subscribe button until they change their color. And hit the bell icon if you don't want to miss the next part. Now, let's start the story. Yui and Kaori were testing out their new weapons by trying to kill each other. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best way to get Yui adjusted to her new night speed. Since Kaori had been a knight long enough to understand and control her piece's speed boost, Naruto had left her in charge of Yui's training until they left tomorrow with Grayfia. Yui and Kaori had forgotten the shinai they used in kendo in exchange for the swords they'd picked up from Kiba 2 days earlier at Naruto's command. Kaori was wielding a new Shitatsu Koda which she'd flatly named Shitatsu Koda 2. However, Yui's sword was quite different from a shinai. When testing out swords, she'd felt drawn again and again to the old-fashioned long-bladed katanas used by samurai of the past. After testing out quite a few and some minor tweaks from Kiba, she'd settled on one which she'd lovingly named Usui Sarasa, or Thin Slicer. Usui Sarasa had a 40-inch blade and a black handle wrapped in pink silk to match her hair. Kiba had adjusted the blade so that while thin it was deadly sharp with a weighted tip for thrusting, despite the fact that katanas were primarily used for slashing. Yui ducked low to avoid a swing from Kaori and countered with a lightning-quick thrust from her katana. However, the swing had been a feint meant to force Yui low, and with a spin the blade slid past Kaori, causing Yui to overreach. It was a simple move for Kaori to swing her sword around and whack Yui in the side. The two white wing stubs on her back activated and Yui had half the speed she'd previously possessed. Kaori allowed Yui to step back and recover her stance, a grin on her face. "You always try to thrust through your opponent," she called out to her friend. "Try to just get your blade in them, it doesn't need to go through. A few inches of point are just as deadly as a few feet of edge." The advice, while well meant, was taken the wrong way by Yui. She was fed up. She'd expected being a devil would be easy, she hadn't realized that it meant constant training and fighting. However, she knew from kendo tournaments that rage would only cloud her judgment, so she forced herself to take deep breaths to calm herself. In. Out. In. Out. Once she had control, she turned to her friend and analyzed her situation. Unlike Kaori, who was naturally gifted when it came to wielding a blade, Yui had always found it difficult. She wasn't as fast or strong as her friend, and in their first few months of kendo together back as children, she had watched as her best friend grew in leaps and bounds. It had felt as if a cavern had separated the two girls, and whenever Yui tried to bridge the gap with late training or weekend practices, Kaori would just develop a new skill and grow further out of her reach. To keep up with her friend, Yui had needed another way to stay in the game, and after days of thought she'd found it. The answer was her mind. She'd spent months watching tournaments and fights, read books on body language, magic tricks and deception. All until she'd gained the ability to analyze her opponents, break down the techniques they used, and counter them. It was her specialty. She'd learned to read those she fought, find the subtle clues in the way they held their body, and shifted their weight as they prepared to strike. If Kaori was the member of the kendo club who stood on top through sheer talent and skill, then Yui would stand in second place as the perfect counter, built by hard work and effort. With her new skills, Yui was finally able to once again stand beside her friend, however she knew that Kaori was better. Being able to read her opponent's next move was meaningless if her body was unable to react fast enough, unable to prepare a counter in time, and if Yui let her mind be clouded with emotions, her ability to analyze went out the window. She had to stay calm and open her mind, as cheesy as it may have sounded, to let herself take in all the small details that the brain normally ignored. Yui lowered her guard, allowing her sword to fall by her side, baiting her opponent to strike. Kaori knew it was a trap, but with Yui at half her original speed and Kaori boosted by the other half, she let herself be overconfident. She was faster than her friend, been a devil longer, allowing her to have more control over her nightly speed, which Yui still struggled to control. With a rush, Kaori charged forward, swinging her blade down in an overhead strike. However, the second she was committed to it, she knew that she'd lost, she'd fallen right into Yui's trap. With perfect control, Yui stepped to the right as Kaori's sword began its downward descent, and then gripping the katana with both hands, she swung the blade into Kaori's exposed stomach. Kaori fell onto her hands and knees, the sword clattering to the ground as she struggled to catch her breath. "Damn, that hurt," she complained as she rolled over so she was sitting on her butt, legs outstretched, hands keeping her propped up. Yui grinned down at her friend. "You always get overconfident at the end when you taste victory. It leads to mistakes and openings. But you take advantage of," Kaori muttered, rolling her eyes, widening her friend's grin. The sound of clapping reached their ears, and the two turned to see Naruto leaning against the open doorway applauding their performance. "Well done, you two. Kaori, nice job reading your opponent, and Yui, good job capitalizing on her openings." However Kaori, you're too aggressive, you rush into any opening you see, and you rely too much on your sacred gear. As for you Yui, you knew that Kaori outmatched you. When you fight someone stronger than you don't rely on the thing they're better than you at, you use your head. You only stepped back and used that brain of yours at the end, until then Kaori had you dead to rights. The two nodded seeing the truth in his words. Naruto stepped into the kendo club room and looked around. The last time he'd been here Yui was dead, Kaori was unconscious, and he'd felt powerless in the face of how this had been done under his watch. It made him mad and he clenched his hands into fists subconsciously. Seeing this the two knights shared a look before storing their swords, and then running up they pressed themselves into their king's arms, each taking one possessively. It's alright, Kaori reassured him, guessing where his thoughts were. He won't be able to do it to us again. We're training, growing stronger so that when we face him, he can't do a thing. Naruto turned to Yui who was nodding in agreement and sighed. It's just, I swore that I'd be stronger. That me and my peerage would be strong enough to prevent something like that from happening again. Kaori died and I revived her. Then Yui died because I couldn't stand to see Riser hitting on what's mine. Naruto didn't notice the blush that spread on Kaori's face when he said that she was his. I feel like I cheated you out of a chance to be human. He said, his eyes still on Yui who was pressing her body into his left arm. If it wasn't for me you'd still be alive. You'd have a chance to grow up, find somebody you loved and marry them, maybe have a kid or two. Now you're a devil, everyone around you will grow old while you stay the same. Your parents, siblings, all of it will go on, and eventually you won't be able to see them without a spell to make you look your actual age. His voice was cut off as a finger was pressed into his lips. He looked into Yui's eyes and saw that she was mad. He lowered his eyes. She had every right to be, he'd listened to her abuse, her anger, it was the least he could do after what he'd done. Are you an idiot? He looked up, surprised at how mad she was. How the hell is this your fault? In case you forgot I was already asking you to turn me into a devil before I died. If anything I'm thankful to that Riser bastard because it finally got you to use an evil piece on me. I wanted this. So don't go doing your little, I wouldn't have done this if there was any other way parade, because I'm not buying it. The way you're acting right now is an insult to both me and Kaori. Naruto turned honestly dumbfounded to find Kaori nodding her head in solemn agreement. You saved us. It wasn't an angel or a god that brought us back and gave us a second chance, it was you. Yui said as she poked Naruto in the chest, hard. So you'd better take responsibility for us and be a damn good king because we're willing to do anything for you. You're our king so shut the fuck up and lead us, damn it. We're your knights, you tell us to fight, we fight. You tell us to kill, we kill. You tell us to die, we're gonna go and do that too because we trusted you have a reason for it. Now quit this pity party and tell us what you want. The knights watched as the sadness in Naruto's eyes turned into determination. He took a breath to collect himself and then looked at each of them. You're right, what's done is done. We can't change it so I'm not going to bother to try. Right now we need to focus on Riser and the raiding game, which is actually why I'm here. He took a deep breath. The last few days I've been working on a contract for a person at our school. That person possesses certain skills that I find desirable. They know I'm a devil and they've expressed an interest in joining my peerage. I was going to accept, but I wanted you two to have a chance to meet that person before I take them up on the offer. I told them that they'd likely find you in here during lunch, training, even though you didn't need to be at school this week. Naruto shut up at the looks Kaori and Yui were giving him. What? You're just going to say yes? I was begging you to revive me as a devil for days, and you're just going to do it to them after they ask once. How is that fair? Yui complained annoyed, while Kaori rubbed her temple in silent agreement. Naruto backed up suddenly on the defensive. Well, first off, you had a sacred gear. We didn't know what so I wanted to wait to see it before I revived you. She doesn't have one. Also with you I had time to waste, as there was nothing serious in the immediate future I needed to concern myself with. However now I'm under the pressure of an upcoming raiding game against someone with a full peerage, and I'll still have an incomplete one, even when I combine both mine and Ria's. Third, we're leaving for training tomorrow, so this is my last chance to get another piece on the table before we head out. The girls couldn't argue with the logic as all the points he'd raised were valid ones. Fine, one last question. What piece would he be? Kaori asked. The pawn, but I'm not a he, I'm a she. The three devils turned to look at the door where Kiyomabe had just entered. Yui and Kaori recognized the girl from seeing her around the school, although they didn't know her name. This is Kiyomabe, Naruto said, walking over to stand beside her. She's a second-year student here at Kuo and a member of the tennis club. She's also descended from a family of beast tamers and is the person who I've been helping with a contract over the last few days. What was the contract for? Yui asked without turning away from the girl. I and Naruto-san helped end my engagement. My father organized it, but Naruto beat him in a fight and now I'm free to pursue whoever I'm interested in. She blushed at that although the two girls noticed the slight tremble in her hands and legs. Naruto said you were a beast tamer, what does that mean? Kaori asked next, like Yui her eyes were locked onto the new girl. It's just like the name implies. I'm a beast tamer. I form contracts with monsters and yokai that allow me to summon them to help me in exchange for something at the time of the contract. I'm the best my family's seen in a long time, which is why they arranged a marriage for me. Which Naruto broke. Kaori finished. Kiyomi nodded her head yes, a faint blush on her cheek visible only to the two girls who were looking at her. The two devils exchanged a glance before they turned to their king. Leave us, they commanded as one. Naruto tried to voice an objection, but the look they sent him had him scurry away with his metaphorical tail between his legs. I'll call Sona and tell her to give you the afternoon off. Naruto told Kiyomi as he left, closing the door behind him. He sighed, he was certain he'd only ever know two things about girls. First was the fact that he'd never understand them, and second was that women were the scariest thing in the universe. Hell, his mom scared the king of the devils to death. Once he was outside the building he pulled out his phone and called Sona, who picked up after the second ring. Yes. Hey, I need you to do me a favor. Naruto, you're running out of favors to give me, Sona stated matter-of-factly. I gave you and your peerage both this week and next week off for training. I'm excusing Ria's peerage from school next week, which is especially difficult because Kaneko doesn't go to this school yet. I'm not really sure what else I can do for you. It's not for me, it's for a student by the name of Kiyomi. A second-year member of the tennis club. Ah, the beast tamer. Yes, I know her. She missed school earlier this week, you wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? I know but I can't tell you. Contract privacy and all that, Naruto explained, receiving another from Sona. According to devil law the details of a contract could only be known by those involved, and sharing the details without the permission of the contractor would cost the devil all the power he had earned from the contract in addition to a small percentage of their own power. Based on the size of the contract. Due to this large contracts were rarely revealed, although some devils competed over who had the more petty contracts. The only devils who had a right to know another devil's contract without causing them to lose power were the Satans who had a right to know the details of any contract they wished toward the kings of a peerage, although this only extended to the members of their own peerage. Revealing the details to them didn't cause a fallout and allowed devils to reveal the details of contracts that could endanger themselves or others. Very well, but why does she need this afternoon off? Sona asked. For Naruto to call her and ask for a non-member of his peerage to be excused from classes meant that he had some reason to be with her. I'm considering inviting her to join my peerage, Naruto said after a moment. He didn't know if Sona or Rias had an eye on her, but this way he could basically call dibs. Unbeknownst to him, that caused Sona to raise her eyebrows in surprise, something that her queen, Tsubaki Shinra took notice of due to how rarely it happened. Fine, I'll grant your request. But next time just use a magic circle to call me for devil business, if it's for human matters use the phone. That's what Rias and I have always done. Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks again. Naruto said as he hung up. Walking over to a nearby tree he sat down to wait for the girls to finish whatever it was they were doing in the club. After a few minutes the warm afternoon reached him and he felt his eyes close. Sensing no immediate danger he allowed himself to slip into dreamland. That was Naruto, I presume? Tsubaki asked Sona as she hung up her phone. Yes, it seems he's found a potential peerage member. That caused Tsubaki to react. At the moment there were no more sacred gear users in the school after Sona had revived Saji and Naruto had revived Kaori and Yui. The three high-class devils had claimed all those that she knew of that had potential. Who? She asked, genuinely curious. Was it possible Naruto had noticed someone Sona and Rias had skipped over? Kiyomi, Sona said, her hands interlocked as she rested her head on them deep in thought. The beast tamer? I thought she had a fear of devils. We approached her to see if she was interested, but she was too afraid to even talk to us. Tsubaki remembered. The poor girl had been trembling so hard she'd barely been able to ask the pair to leave her alone. When Rias had tried it hadn't gone much better, even though she'd tried to use Kiba as bait to attract her. As a result the two kings had written her off as unusable due to her fear of devils and decided to look for peerage members elsewhere. It seems that Naruto may have succeeded where we failed. I wish I knew how he did it. She shook her head in wonder before turning to her queen. Anyway, he requested that I have her excused from her afternoon classes, say she went home due to a cold or something, and throw in her club activities too. If he reincarnates her she won't be going to them. If we see her this afternoon at the meeting have her excused for the rest of next week as well, she'll likely have taken his offer and be training for their raiding game. As Tsubaki ran off to carry out her king's orders, Sona once again shook her head at how Naruto had been able to accomplish what she hadn't. I wish I knew. Naruto was awoken by a soft pressure on his forehead. Opening his eyes he found himself looking into the face of Kiyomi, a sweet smile on her face. "I'm sorry, did I wake you up?" she asked. Instead of answering, Naruto just closed his eyes again. "Don't stop," he said softly, "it feels nice." He didn't need to open his eyes to know that she'd be giving him her sweet smile. A contented sigh escaped his lips as he felt her finger begin to stroke his messy hair. "As you wish, my king," she said softly. Hearing her response, Naruto cracked open an eye although he kept the other closed. "King? So you?" "Yes, I have their permission," Kiyomi said, nodding her head towards Naruto's feet. Propping himself up, Naruto looked down the length of his body, only to see his two knights standing there angrily. Now girls." Kiyomi reprimanded them, a note of pride in her voice that was inaudible to Naruto. "We had a deal. Winner got to give a lap pillow." At that, Naruto turned back to see that he had indeed been lying on her lap while he slept. "Ahem, Naruto, if you don't mind, we need to hurry it up," Kaori said, getting his attention. "School just let out for the day and we're supposed to go and meet up with Rias and Sona in 15 minutes at the Orc." Naruto nodded his acknowledgement. The three kings had decided to have the peerages meet one another before Naruto left with his and Rias for training. It was more of a formality than anything else, so that everyone knew which devils belonged to which king at the school. Speaking of peerages, Naruto turned to his knights. "So you two are okay with Kiyomi joining?" he asked just to be safe. The two girls nodded, although Yui looked a little exasperated. Though he hadn't known her long, Naruto could tell what she was thinking. "I just told you earlier to do what you want. You're a devil and our master, so make a decision and stick with it. We'll follow whatever path you take." While Naruto did intend to be more confident in future recruiting, he still desired his peerage's input. "Great, it's a Friday so Kendo isn't meeting today, let's do it in there," he said, leading his way back into the building, leaving the girls to follow along behind him. Once they were inside, Naruto closed the door and set a barrier on it so that if any humans tried to enter, they would forget what they were doing and remember something they had to do elsewhere. As for other devils, they would see the Gremory clan sigil and know to stay away. Turning, Naruto saw that Kiyomi had taken off her top, leaving her in her bra and skirt. Naruto turned his head sharply to the side, although he'd noticed that her breasts were bigger than both Kaori's and Yui's. "What are you doing?" he asked, head to the side. "Kaori and Yui told me that it would be easier if I was in my underwear," Kiyomi explained, "and you can look, Naruto. You're going to be my master, so it's only right that you know everything about me." Hearing that, Naruto turned so he was looking at her, although he kept his eyes firmly away from the murderous aura where he assumed Kaori and Yui were standing. "White," he thought absent-mindedly. It suited her innocent personality, although there were moments like just now where he thought that black or purple lingerie would be more suitable for her. "It doesn't really matter," he said. "It'll only make it easier by a few seconds." "Great, so what do I need to do?" Kaori asked. "Just lie down on the floor, hands by your side. I'll take care of everything else. But before I start, are you sure? Once I'm done there's no going back. You'll be mine forever, just like Yui and Kaori." "Dusty, do it." Kiyomi said, her cheeks having turned red at his comment. Unbeknownst to Naruto, the same had happened to Kaori and Yui. "Okay, then close your eyes." Summoning his evil pieces to him, Naruto looked them over before taking out a pawn which he set on Kiyomi's collarbone. As he set it down, Kiyomi shivered, the piece felt ice cold on her bare skin. Then Naruto began to chant, "I, Naruto Gremory, claim Kiyomi as my own. She shall be my pawn, the one who leads my forces from the front at my command. None shall have her except for me, so let her be made into my servant." As he chanted, the red pawn slowly sank into Kiyomi's chest, who shivered at the foreign feeling. However, as it entered, she felt it warm up until it was as if she was standing next to a peaceful hearth or napping in the afternoon sun. The comforting warmth spread throughout her body until she could feel it in every fiber of her being, within her very soul. "So I order, let it be done." At the last word, the warmth in Kiyomi disappeared, though she could feel a new strength inside her. "You can sit up," Naruto said. She followed his advice and accidentally unsheathed her new devil wings, giving her a scare. Sensing her fear, Naruto let out his own, followed shortly by Kaori and Yui. The four devils stood for a second, taking in the others around them. "So how do you feel?" Naruto asked after a moment, sheathing his wings followed by his peerage. Kiyomi considered his question. "I feel the same, but also different. It's like there's something inside of me that wasn't there before." Naruto flashed her a grin, "That would be the pawn inside of you. I already told you what it can do, but I'll give you a short recap later. Anything else?" Kiyomi shook her head no, but Naruto got a question from Kaori. "Why didn't she pass out like me or Yui?" she asked curiously. Naruto's expression turned downward. "Because she's alive and healthy. I reincarnated her with her knowledge and permission. In cases like those, the reincarnation is short and sweet. But when it comes to reviving the dead, well, let's just say that once the soul leaves your body, it's not that willing to come back and it takes time to settle back in. That's why I took you two to my bedroom when I reincarnated you guys. It let me keep an eye on you and use healing magic to make sure nothing went wrong. You took them to your bedroom? Kiyomi asked, jaw agape. Naruto turned to respond, but Kaori answered for him, a twinkle in her eye. We'll explain later, but now's not the time, we need to go. The orc, right? What's that? Kiyomi asked. She'd heard the name before, but she couldn't place her finger on what it stood for. Naruto flashed her a Cheshire grin, it's the club run by my aunt. Now that you're a part of my peerage, don't you think it's about time you met my family? I've already met yours after all. Kiyomi shook her head blushing, but followed along with the knights behind Naruto, her new king. The peerages were on edge. Before them were the three most powerful devils in the area, likely in all of southern Japan. The childer siblings of the Satans, their masters, sat before them. Ria's Gremory sat at her desk, resting her head on her interwoven hands. On one couch to the left of Ria's, from Ria's perspective, Sona Citri sat, hands on her lap. On her right sat a girl with glasses and dark hair that fell down to her knees. Across from Sona, Naruto lay lazily on a second couch, taking up the entire sofa, his head propped up with a pillow, so he could look comfortably at Ria's and turn his head to look at Sona. Behind each king stood their respective peerages. After a moment Sona sighed, fine, I'll go first, otherwise none of us are leaving here anytime soon. I'm Sona Citri, a second year. I'm the younger sister of the Satan Seraphol Leviathan, an heir to the Citri clan. She gestured to the girl by her side who bowed to the kings. My name is Tsubaki Shinra, a second-year student, and I'm Sona's queen. After that the rest of Sona's peerage introduced themselves. I'm a first-year student, Momo Hanakai, Sona's bishop. A white-haired girl introduced herself. I'm Ryakusaka, a first-year student, and like Momo I'm Sona's bishop. This from a brown-haired girl. I'm Omaguri, a first year, and I'm Sona's knight. This came from a girl with a mix of red and brown hair. Naruto felt Yui and Kaori take special notice of the girl with new interest, although they kept it hidden. And I'm Tsubasa Yura, Sona's rook, and like the majority of the others I'm a first year. A blue-haired girl said. The last member of Sona's peerage stepped forward, an arrogant smile on his face, although Naruto didn't miss the look the white-haired girl Momo Hanakai was giving him. Looks like Kaichu saved the best for last. I'm Genshiro Saji, her pawn, and I'm worth 4 evil pieces, so any pawns in your peerages better watch out. Yui and Kaori felt Kiyomi, who was standing between them, start to tremble from the threat put out in the open. Kaori opened her mouth to say something, but before she could she felt a sudden burst of murderous intent from the couch in front of her. As she watched Naruto turn until his feet were on the floor and pushed himself up. She could almost see a red mist of rage emitting from her king as he strode forward, stopping in front of the pawn. The other two kings seemed like they wanted to say something, but they decided to just watch the show in silence, for now. Sorry, I guess I didn't hear that last bit you said. Could you repeat it for me please? Naruto said, flashing a disarming smile at the pawn as he lay a friendly hand on his shoulder. Saji was unsure of himself, he had said what he did in an effort to make his king look strong, but the boy in front of him was acting differently from what he'd expected. However, even if he was a high-class devil he only had 3 servants, whereas Sona had almost her entire peerage completed, give or take a few pieces. Smiling confidently he repeated himself, yeah, I was saying that I'm the strongest pawn here, so any pawns in your peerage better watch themselves, or that was as far as he got before he felt bone-crushing pressure on his shoulder, where the king was gripping him. Ah, he cried as he felt the bone in his shoulder crack. Sorry Sona, Naruto said, offering Sona an apologetic grin, but it seems that your pawn dislikes one of my servants, before he could even meet her. He isn't exactly giving her the best outlook when it comes to devils, is he? Naruto tutted, his eyes deadly serious, he tightened his grip causing Saji to whimper. Sona sighed, angry at her pawn, though she managed to hide her emotions from the others. I agree that my pawn has insulted you and your servants. She flashed Saji a look of frosty disappointment before turning back to Naruto. You can do what you want, just know that I'll make certain this is the last time he makes such a statement. Naruto nodded in understanding before releasing Saji, who collapsed to his knees, his working arm coming to his injured shoulder as he whimpered in pain. I feel like this makes us even, don't you Sona? Naruto said as he returned to the sofa where he lay back down as if nothing had happened. Sona sighed again, Naruto had played his cards well. In one swoop he'd manipulated the situation so that all the favors he owed Sona were paid back. She had already planned on how she'd call in a few of them, but now if she did that she would owe him one. The thing about devils was that when it came to favors owed, they always had to pay them back no matter what the favor had been originally. Very well, Yura takes Saji to the club room. I'll deal with him when I get back. The last part of the message sounded like a dark promise, but the rook nodded before picking up the injured boy and carrying him out of the room. When the door closed, Riaz turned to her nephew. Very well, considering you caused a fuss, Naruto, I think it's only fair that you go next. Sure, sounds good to me. Naruto said, rolling his neck. I'm Naruto Gremory, first-year student, Ria's nephew, and I'm the firstborn long-lost son of the Satan Sirzechs Lucifer and Grayfia Lucifuge. These girls are my peerage. So saying, he gestured to the three girls who'd been standing behind him. On the way over, he told them the order to go in and what to say, so they'd know what to do. Kaori stepped forward first. I'm Kaori Murayama, Naruto's knight and a first year. She bowed respectively before stepping back so Yui could step up. My name's Yui Kadis, and I'm Naruto's second knight. She stepped back before she cried out, oh yeah, and I'm a first year. Last but not least was Kiyum, who stepped forward, a slight tremble in her voice from the way Saji had talked. I am Kiyum Abe, I'm Naruto's pawn and I'm a second-year student. Do I need to tell them how many pieces I'm worth? The question was directed at Naruto, who shook his head no and gestured for her to step back, leaving only the three behind Riaz. First up was a black-haired girl with what was clearly the largest chest in the room. As she felt his gaze on her, the girl shivered in hidden pleasure. She'd seen him shatter Saji's shoulder with one hand, oh the things he could do to her. Smiling, she introduced herself, I'm Akeno Himejima, a second-year student and Ria's queen. She stepped back so that the person everybody knew could. I'm Yudo Kiba, a first-year student and Ria's knight. So saying, he flashed everybody in the room his Prince Charming grin, which invoked a few blushes from the Sona peerage, although there was a noticeable lack from Naruto's. Their only reaction was for the two knights to size him up, realizing that he was their matchup in the event of a fight. Last but not least was a small, white-haired girl, almost all like in appearance, who was nibbling on a piece of chocolate. Kaneko. Rook. I'll be a first year next year. Then she stepped back to focus on her chocolate, allowing her king to stand up from her chair to introduce herself. And I'm their king, Riaz Gremory. Heir of the Gremory clan, little sister of the Satan Sirzechs and Naruto's aunt. She turned to Naruto and his peerage. You'll be seeing a lot of me and my peerage next week, since we'll be training with you for the raiding game. Nodding his acknowledgement, Naruto stood up and excused himself, saying that he needed to explain a few things to Kiyum and his peerage about training, as well as what to tell their families. Once they'd left, Riaz and Sona turned to talk, while their peerages intermingled, although the queen stayed with their kings. So he managed to recruit a tamer. Riaz noted. Sona nodded, he called me during lunch and had me excuse her from her afternoon classes. Looks like she took him up on his offer. The two kings looked towards the door Naruto and his peerage had left through. She had such a fear of the underworld and the devils. I'm surprised that he was able to do it. Riaz tried to think of how Naruto could do it, but she kept drawing a blank. The only thing I can tell you is that she missed school earlier this week and Naruto mentioned that he'd been completing a contract for her. Well, that doesn't narrow things down, Riaz complained. She sighed, it didn't matter how Naruto had recruited her, all that mattered was that he was growing his peerage. If she needed to, she could just ask Naruto or Grayfia for the information. Will you be going to training with them? Sona asked. Riaz wasn't able to participate in the raiding game, only her peerage, but knowing her friend, she'd go along to supervise the training. Or treat it like a vacation, she could see her friend doing both. Riaz flashed her friend a grin. What do you think? Sona sighed, Gremory, she complained in her head. Grayfia straightened a stray hair on Naruto's head and stepped back to admire her handiwork. In front of her, Naruto stood dressed in a red athletic polo, with the top two buttons undone, and a black blazer with the Gremory clan sigil in red on his left breast pocket above his heart. He had on black dress pants to match his blazer, and his hair, while still a disorganized mess, had been modeled by devil stylists to look rebellious rather than unkempt. To complete the young aristocrat look, draped over Naruto's right shoulder and held in place with a golden chain, was a red capelet with gold embroidery, creating the Gremory crest which clashed vividly against the dark blazer. Overall, Naruto looked like a suitable rival for the phoenix he was facing. Nodding her head in approval, Grayfia strode to the door and opened it, allowing in all those who had been waiting outside. First through the orc's door was Sirzechs himself, who walked over to his son and gave him a quick once-over, nodding his approval at the outfit his wife had decided on. Following behind were the members of Naruto's peerage as well as Riaz, who would be participating in the game as pseudo-pieces for Naruto to command. The girls in Naruto's peerage rushed over and had him model his outfit, voicing their approval of the look. Noticeably absent from the gathering was Riaz herself, who would be watching the raiding game in a private box with the Gremory and Phoenix families. You look good, Naruto. Sirzechs said to get his son's attention. Hearing his voice, the girls stepped back, allowing Naruto to step forward and talk with his father. Also, word of advice, he gestured his son closer so he could whisper in his ear, don't worry about Ravel. She's been excluded from the game by her parents out of fear she might cause a commotion to assist you. You can go all out. Hearing this, Naruto nodded his head in thanks and stepped back. Turning, Sirzechs addressed the assembled peerages. As for you all, don't think that a week of training will suddenly turn you into powerhouses that will be able to best everyone you face. Riser and his peerage have never lost unless they meant to. They are undefeated and are experienced. Well, this is the first time you all will be participating in a raiding game. Seeing the downcast looks he was receiving, Sirzechs decided to hurry along to the point he was originally trying to make. But that experience will make them arrogant. They will underestimate you, and if you all have improved as much as Grayfia and my peerage say that you have, then I expect Riser and his peerage are in for a rude awakening. Sirzechs let out a mental sigh of relief at the determined looks he was now receiving. If he'd broken their will to fight before the game even began, then Grayfia would have killed him, as would his parents. Even though his parents already had a grandchild in his second son Milikas, they were spoiling Naruto rotten whenever he visited them in the underworld, as if to make up for lost time. If they'd heard that he'd broken his peerage's will, well, he shuddered to think about how they'd react, especially his mother. That sweet woman could turn into the incarnation of the original Lucifer if she so desired. He'd seen it before and been on the receiving end of it only once. Once had been enough. He was broken from his train of thought by a polite cough from the open doorway, in which stood Sona and her queen Tsubaki. "Forgive me for interrupting Lucifer-sama," Grayfia Senshi said, bowing low, as did Tsubaki. "But it is time for you two to make your way to the observation box." Sirzechs nodded, and taking his wife's arm the two walked to the doorway. Reaching it, Sirzechs couldn't help but turn around, a grin on his face. "Oh, and give them hell for me." The grins that he saw before Grayfia pulled him away was worth a scolding he was certain he'd receive later. Sighing at the interruption, Sona turned back to the devils before her. "My peerage and I are responsible for the game's broadcast. We're expecting quite the audience. It's the official debut of a Satan's son after all." At that, a minuscule smile appeared on her lips. "I volunteered for the task. It is your first game, Naruto." Her expression turned serious as she went on with the explanation. "In a few moments a teleportation circle will appear and teleport you to the battlefield. Once you are there, you will have 30 minutes to strategize before the game begins. There will be an announcement at the starting point, so you need not worry about keeping track of time. I will be in the student council room managing the broadcast." Having delivered her message, she turned to leave, but paused. "Oh, and Naruto turned back to look at her. "For what it means, I'm rooting for you." Before he could respond, Sona left, although she could hear a giggle she recognized as Akeno's as she strode down the hall. Within moments of Sona's departure, a red teleportation circle appeared in the middle of the clubroom as promised. With no hesitation, Naruto and the gathered devils stepped onto it and were swallowed by the light. When they reappeared, Yui was surprised to see that they were still in the clubroom. "Did the circle work?" she asked aloud. "Yes." Turning, she saw that it was Naruto who'd spoken as he walked over to sit in the seat normally occupied by Rias. "If you need any proof, look out the window." Confused, Yui followed her king's advice and walked over to take a look, only to react in shock at the view. Outside were the school ground, identical to those she'd seen every day for months. But the sky, still black due to the night, now had green auroras shining throughout it. "We're in an alternate universe," Naruto explained. "Holding raiding games in dimensions created just for the game allows the participants to go all out with no fear of the environment." Yui could only nod, still in shock despite the explanation. However, she was snapped out of it by an announcement that seemed to originate from all around them, as if the speaker was standing right there. "I am the Demon Lord Ajuka Beelzebub, appointed judge for this raiding game. Taking the opinions of the two kings, the battlefield for this game is a replica of Kuo Academy, the school Naruto attends in the human world. Both parties have been teleported to their main base and provided with a map of the battlefield. Naruto-san's main base is in the Occult Research Club room in the old schoolhouse, while Riser-san's base is located in the principal's office in the new schoolhouse. Thus, pawns are allowed to promote if they reach the enemy's schoolhouse. The game will begin in 30 minutes. During this time, neither team is allowed to leave their current room. I wish both teams the best of luck." But the message delivered, the voice cut out, leaving Naruto to take in his peerage. For this game, Ria's pieces would fill in for pieces he didn't possess. That means Akeno was Naruto's queen, Kaneko was his rook, and Kiba, since Naruto already had both his knights, was delegated to a pawn, with a worth of 3, due to his knightly status. Turning to Akeno, Naruto had her summon communication spells which he could use to give orders throughout the game. The others gathered around Ria's desk to look at the map spread out upon it. The enemy's base is located in the new schoolhouse. To reach it, it'd be quickest to cut across the yard, but Naruto trailed off as Kiba picked up his thoughts. "We'd be in plain sight." "Yeah, it's too risky." "Then how about we approach from the back, across the track field?" Akeno offered. Riser would be expecting that. Naruto frowned. To prepare for the raiding game, he'd had Grayfia bring him footage of Riser's previous matches. While he would readily admit that Riser's personality was trash, upon seeing the footage, Naruto had been forced to admit that he was a decent strategist. He's probably placed some rooks and knights around this clubhouse. Naruto pointed to a spot on the map next to the new schoolhouse. Protecting their flank, Kaori nodded in understanding. It's an old tactic, but it's a battle-tested one proven to work. Guillaume had been looking at the map with a frown when she suddenly spotted a place they'd overlooked. How about the gym? She asked. It's in the middle of the school and would offer protection from an attack straight up the middle. It's also about the same distance from each schoolhouse, so we could use it for attack or defense as needed. Seeing the wisdom of the idea, Naruto nodded in agreement. It's indoors, so a rook would be better than a knight. He noted, turning to Kaneko, who nodded in understanding. Leave it to me, she said softly. Naruto nodded, turning to the others. Akeno, Kiba, when we're able to leave, I want you two to set up traps in the forest to protect our flanks. Once you're done, Akeno, cover it with illusions. The two responded in the affirmative as they turned to discuss what spells they'd use to conserve their power while being enough to defeat an opponent. Naruto turned to his most recent peerage member, Kiyomi. I want you to summon Poppy. I'm going to need her for my plan. Kiyomi nodded and put her hands on the ground to carry out his order. What about us? Two voices sensed, and Naruto turned to look at his knights. You two are my reserves. I want Kaori to stay back until we spot a knight so you can use your sacred gear. As for you, Yui, now that we know what your sacred gear can do, I want to keep you hidden as long as possible. Riser may even think you're dead and not know I brought you back. Besides, if my plan for Riser fails, we're going to be depending on you to deal with him, so we can't afford to have you taken out of the game too early. For the moment, you two are going to stay with me. The two nodded with reluctance, disappointed that they wouldn't see immediate action, but happy that they'd get some quality time with their king. Over the next 20 minutes, Naruto was busy approving traps, explaining what he wanted from the monster Poppy, giving orders about where he wanted Yuuto to go and Akeno to do once they finished. Too soon the voice of the Satan Beelzebub returned. Time has expired. The rating game between Naruto Gremory and Riser Phoenix will now begin. Before the voice had even finished speaking, Akeno, Kiba, and a monster were out the doors, followed closely by Kaneko and Kiyomi. Now all we do is wait, Naruto said, leaning forward in his chair as he folded his hands in front of him. His two knights moved to stand behind him. Naruto, I'm done here. Nice job, Kaneko, thanks for all your hard work. You sound a little tired though, are you doing all right? Naruto asked. In response, he received a grunt from Kaneko. Just tell Akeno to do it. She ordered, her voice tight. Okay, I will. Get out of there. He didn't receive a response, but he figured that Kaneko could take care of herself. Instead, he pulled up a communication with Akeno. Akeno, Kaneko's done. Do it at your leisure. He ordered, receiving a chuckle from the girl. He shivered slightly. Ara, I'm needed so soon. Oh well, it's so nice to be desired. Standing up, Naruto walked over to a nearby window to look outside. Even from the club room, he could see the storm clouds forming, with Akeno, hand raised, at the center of the storm. The bright flash of lightning caused him to blink, and when he opened them, he could see an explosion in the distance as Akeno used her lightning magic to destroy the gym. In response, Beelzebub's voice returned. One of Riser's rook and 3 pawns have retired. Naruto grinned, but the voice continued, emotionless. Naruto's rook has retired. At that, Naruto froze, the grin still on his face. What? He turned to see his expression mirrored on Yui and Kaori's faces. Kaneko's retired. But she said that she was done with her job. The two knights looked at their king for answers, only to see him sit down on a couch, his face a mask. She never said that she completed her job. He said, realizing what the girl had said. She said she was done. The knights looked at him shocked, as understanding dawning on them. 3 pawns and a rook, that's a bad matchup even at her best, but to go so far as to sacrifice herself. He shook his head. Feeling a hand on his shoulder, he looked up at Kaori. She knew what she was doing. The knight said. Naruto could feel the emotions in her voice, but nodded in agreement. Yeah, we'll win, for her. Turning to face his front, he summoned his communication spell with Akeno. Akeno. Naruto, did you know? He voice trailed off. Naruto knew that she was suffering from shock, having used her powers on her friend. Akeno. Naruto said, keeping his voice controlled. I used all my power. I thought of how good it would feel to hurt them, but Kaneko-chan was in there and I blew her. Akeno. Naruto's voice knocked the girl from her stupor. Kaneko did her job, now we need to do ours. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Akeno's voice was cold and Naruto could feel her hatred. Akeno, he said, his voice lowering an octave, unsure at who she was directing her emotions at. What's going on? Their queen showed up. The news caused Naruto to sit up alarmed. Is she alone? He asked, mind racing. Yes, it looks like she wants a one-on-one duel with me. How should I proceed? Naruto could hear the anger in her voice, but she was controlling it. If she'd been controlled by it, Naruto would have ordered her to retreat immediately, but they were outnumbered, and here was an opportunity to take Riser's queen off the board. Still, Naruto hesitated. It felt like a trap, too good to be true. "Can you beat her?" he asked. "Yes. Then you have my blessing. Kaori and Yui will go to the track field to meet up with Kiba and Kiim." As he said the names, an announcement came in: 3 of Riser's pawns have retired. Naruto smiled grimly. Turning, he saw Kaori and Yui already making their way to the door to leave, having heard his instructions. "In the meantime, I'll come and help you. Riser has only 2 pawns left, so I don't see the need to protect the old schoolhouse anymore. It's time to move to the next step in my plan. After all, the crowds are watching to see the son of a Satan. I might as well give them a show." So saying, the 3 devils left their base, leaving the old building undefended. At the edge of the track, Kaori, Yui, Kiba and Kiim stood and looked out over the empty field. "It's a trap," Kaori said flatly. "Has to be," Yui said, the other 2 nodding their heads sagely in agreement. "Poppy says that she saw 5 people here," Kiim reported. Naruto had put her and Poppy in charge of scouting out enemy positions and then reporting them back to him, allowing him to move his pieces to create traps and ambushes. The other 3 looked at her confused until she pointed in the air. Looking, they saw a harpy, Poppy they assumed, flying above them. Kiba squinted and then looked away. Why isn't she wearing anything?" he asked. "She's wearing panties," Kiim argued, pointing at the small undergarments that clung tightly to the bird girl's waist. "Yeah, but why isn't she wearing a bra?" Kiba said as his face heated up, a red blush spreading across his cheeks. Kiim tilted her head at Ria's knight in confusion. "Her feathers cover her chest," she said slowly, as if talking to a small child. "If she wore a bra, it could damage them. Harpy feathers act as natural body armor for both fighting and flying in cold climates or high altitudes. Besides, they cover anything important. Why would she need anything else?" Kiba opened his mouth to explain, but wasn't sure what to say. Seeing a chance to target Kuo Academy's Prince Charming, Yui took her shot. "Maybe Kiba wants a look and is disappointed that he can't see anything," she teased. Kiba's face grew even redder at the image that popped up in his mind immediately. The harpy girl on her back in a bed, looking up at him as she bit the inside of her lip. It's my first time, so be gentle." Kiba shook his head, trying to get his head out of the gutter, much to Yui's amusement. Spotting something, he almost sighed in relief. "Looks like we have company," he warned, grinning at the change in subject as 5 girls walked across the track field towards them. 1 was dressed in a purple kimono, 2 appeared to be catgirls based on the ears and canines poking out from under their lip, the 4th both Yui and Kaori recognized as Sirzechs, the knight sent by Riser to deal with Kaori, which had led to Yui's death and subsequent reincarnation. The last one wore armor that appeared to be a cross between a samurai and a European knight. Upon spotting Kaori, Sirzechs' face contorted in rage. Drawing her 2-handed sword, she pointed it at the girl. "You," she snarled. "You're the one who beat me. It's because of you that Riser-sama doesn't trust me to carry out my tasks anymore." An evil grin spread across the girl's face. "Be my opponent," she challenged. "If I can beat you, I'll regain my honor and Riser's trust." Kaori smiled right back with a confident smirk. "I accept," Riser interrupted us once. "I find it unlikely that he'll do so again." So saying, she drew her sword and the 2 rushed forward, intending to chop the other's head off, or at least maim them, whichever came first. As their respective parties watched, the girls' fight carried them away from the track and towards the woods. With an overused sigh, the girl in the purple kimono stepped forward. "I'm Mihi, Riser's bishop. The other is indisposed at the moment due to the issue we're currently fighting over. As for my companions, that's Carloman, a knight," she gestured to the knight, "and those 2 are Nai and Lee, Riser's last 2 pawns. Nai has the blue hair and Lee has the red hair. As for the one who just left, that's Sirzechs. I do apologize for her earlier behavior. She's one of Riser-sama's more eccentric peerage members. As for her past actions, I do apologize, but she was merely carrying out our master's orders." "Enough, Mihi," the knight, Carloman said, stepping forward. "I wish to do battle, however 2 of you possess a sword. I will let you decide amongst yourselves who shall do battle with me." Kiba went to step forward but was stopped by Yui, who had already drawn her katana. "Leave this to me." Kiba opened his mouth to protest, but Yui stopped him before he could say anything. "You aren't a knight right now, you're a pawn. You don't have the speed you normally possess, and you haven't had a chance to use promotion. The 3 pawns you eliminated earlier was done with the assistance of Kiim and the traps you and Akeno set. She's a knight and so am I. Leave this fight to me." Kiba closed his mouth. She was right, besides this fight was between Riser and Naruto. While he was happy to help his friend at the moment, Naruto's piece's opinion was more important than his. This was Naruto's debut rating game, a chance for him to show off the strength of him and his peerage. Rias hadn't yet had a rating game, and Kiba would make his official debut there. But right now the members of Naruto's peerage outranked him when it came to what they wanted to do. Understood, he said with a curt nod. With his approval Yui stepped forward. I am Yui Caddis, Naruto's second knight. I shall be your opponent Carloman. I have but one request. The others wish to fight each other as well. As such, to give them room so that we do not interfere with their fight nor they with ours, I ask that you allow us to fight on the other half of the field. Yui said in a formal voice, mocking the uptight knight. Carloman considered her request before nodding her head, the jab flying completely by her. That condition is acceptable. Let us proceed with haste, Lady Caddis. With the eagerness of a schoolgirl, Carloman practically skipped across the field. As Yui followed her, she looked back at Yudo and mouthed, WTF, as she pointed at her opponent. In response, Kiba could only raise an eyebrow and shrug. The departure of the two knights left Kiba and Kiam against Mihi, Lee, and I. Cautiously, Kiba went to stand next to the pawn. Who do you want? He asked in a side whisper. I'll take the cat girls. Kiam said with determination, causing Kiba to look at her with surprise. Really? Why? Because of Saji, the boy in Sona's peerage. He threatened me and Naruto was the one who defended me. Saji said that he's worth 4 pawns and I'm only worth 1, that as a result I'm naturally weaker than him. I want to grow strong enough to beat Saji, to beat someone worth multiple pawns on my own, even though I'm only worth 1. That's my goal, and that means that I need to start off with defeating these 2 pawns right here. So saying, Kiam put her hands on the ground. Seeing what her master was doing, Poppy the harpy flew down and landed in it. Her master was not yet strong enough to handle 2 summoned monsters at once. That meant that in order to summon a monster she needed to get rid of the one she already had summoned. Thanks, Poppy. Kiam said with a grin as the harpy disappeared in a magic circle. Those 2 look like physical fighters, so I need strength. Which means her, she thought. Having chosen her summon, Kiam called out to the contracted monster through their link. Should we attack? Lee asked her sister. She stood with her hands behind her head as she looked in confusion at, well, whatever it was the brown drill-headed girl was trying to do. We should, it looks like she's up to something. Nai said, nodding her head in agreement. One of her cat ears twitched. It does, but if we attack now, we won't have any fun. We'll beat her and then help Mihi beat Blondie. Then the 3 of us will help the others until everyone has been beaten. Yeah, which means even if we don't get to have fun with her, we may get to have fun with one of the other ones. Nai said, grinning as she began to prance around, eager at the thought of the opponent she may face. Plus it'll make Riser Sama happy. Lee finished her twin's thoughts, matching her grin. Which means, the 2 said in one voice as they launched themselves at the defenseless girl who had her hands on the ground. You need to be retired. Together the twins pulled back their hands, Lee her right and Nai her left. Together they unleashed it at Kiam, expecting her to be flung backwards by the blows, unconscious before she even left the ground. However, their strikes failed to reach her as each was caught by a hand. They watched in shock as a monster turned to look at them. Then in one voice they screamed. That left Mihi and Kiba to face each other. A bishop against a former knight and temporary pawn. Drawing the sword at his waist, Kiba bared it at the girl. I am Yudo Kiba, Ria's Gremory's knight and Naruto Gremory's temporary pawn. I shall ask you only once, will you resign? Before he'd even finished asking the question, the bishop was already shaking her head no. I thank you for the offer, pawn of Gremory. But I am not the one who will lose if we battle. As such I ask, will you resign? Kiba responded with his best Prince Charming grin. One that made Mihi blush despite herself. If I did, I would find myself unable to face my temporary king. Kiba said. So I apologize, but please lose, so that my king's selfish desire for a companion might come about. Lunging, Kiba rushed the bishop, even without his knight speed he still was incredibly fast. However, before he could get close the bishop had already moved back. Mihi tutted, wagging a finger at Kiba as he stepped back, taking a defensive position. Attacking a lady, that's not a very knightly thing to do. Male or female, young or old, if they stand in the way of my king, I shall strike them down. Kiba said with determination. Then I shall strike you down first. Let's see just how far your loyalty gets you. Waving her hand, Mihi sent a stream of blue magic at Kiba which the knight rolled to avoid. The spell flew by harmlessly and hit the ground, causing jagged ice to spring from where it hit. If that's all you can do, then I have nothing to fear. Kiba said, rushing forward. With a lazy grin, Mihi sent 4 more spells flying at the approaching pawn. Kiba sidestepped the first 2 and swung his sword to cut through the third, but when his sword hit the spell the blade froze and shattered. Kiba paused in surprise for a moment, which allowed the 4th spell to hit him in the chest, knocking him onto his back. You get it now? Mihi asked, summoning a magic circle to each of her hands. My ice will freeze anything it touches. It may not be as strong as Grayfia Sama's or your king's, but for a pawn it's more than enough. She watched as her opponent rolled over onto his chest and propped himself on all 4s, panting from the hit. You got me good, Kiba admitted with a sly smile. But this fight is my win. So saying he screamed, sword birth. Out of the ground all around the pawn, swords of all different shapes and sizes rose up at his command. Mihi stepped back in shock, a look of anger broke through her calm demeanor. "A sacred gear," she muttered angrily. "Of course you had a trick up your sleeves. No pawn would face a bishop otherwise." Her anger calmed until once again her face was expressionless. "But no matter, this changes nothing." With that, Mihi sent several more light blue spells towards the pawn. Pulling two swords from the ground, Kiba rushed to meet the attack, dodging and weaving his way towards the bishop, who increased the volley, her calm facade never once letting up. When she was just outside his sword range, Kiba found himself facing a spell he didn't have time to dodge. Swinging one of his swords, Kiba sliced at the spell, causing Mihi to offer a slight grin in expectation. However, when the sword and spell collided, she watched in shock as it cut through the spell like a hot knife through butter. "How?" Mihi asked, eyes wide in shock, pausing her onslaught. Seeing that she wasn't attacking him anymore, Kiba decided to answer. "My sacred gear doesn't allow me to just create swords," Kiba explained. "It also allows me to imbue them with attributes of my choice. You cast ice magic, so I imbued them with fire. It seems that my fire overcame your ice. Now if you don't mind, can we get back to the fight?" "Very well," Mihi agreed, summoning more magic circles. "Let's end our battle in a way that'll make our kings proud." With a cry, Kiba rushed forward as spells sorted him. He cut through many and dodged more, but he couldn't avoid them all. One grazed his leg, another his arm, a third his right side, and a fourth his left ear. But Kiba ignored the pain, pushing onwards. Flashback. Kiba stood in front of Surtur II. The rook of Sirzechs, Lucifer, who was so strong it had taken a mutation piece to reincarnate him. "Do you know why you're training with me and not Saoji?" the clone giant boomed. "No," Kiba admitted. It frustrated him. He had been trained by Akita-sensei before to prepare for his job as Ria's knight. He had expected to do so again, practicing technique or a new style for the raiding game. Instead, Grayfia and Naruto had sent him and Kaneko to train under the giant's supervision. It was frustrating. "You are here because this is what you most need," the giant explained, causing Kiba to look at him in confusion. "You are used to being a knight, to being able to dodge all attacks and attack your enemy's blind spots. However, this time you shall be fighting as a pawn, and there is no guarantee that you will be able to promote during the raiding game. Knights are naturally weak, relying on their legs to dodge. They aren't used to taking hits and continuing on through the pain." Kiba nodded in agreement at the giant's wisdom. He was right, there was no guarantee that he would promote during the game. He could very well have no special skills to rely on the entire time, but shouldn't he be training with Akita-sensei then? Training to dodge attacks or wield his swords in a way that would allow him to overcome this weakness. Seeing the doubt still in his pupil's eyes, the giant sighed, beckoning Kaneko, who was punching a rock, to come to him. "It seems you still do not understand," the giant growled low. "You are here to train your endurance, to take hits and keep on moving. I have 1 week to train you, so let's begin." Kaneko, hit him. "Yes, sensei." Before Kiba could even react, he was flung backwards from the blow to his stomach. Curling into a ball, he threw up the contents of his breakfast. "Disgusting," the giant growled. Hearing that, Kiba pushed himself to his feet unsteadily, wiping his mouth on the back of his shirt sleeve. He glared at the giant. Seeing his reaction, Surtur offered him an evil grin. "Well, looks like you want to keep going." Kaneko hit him again. The white-haired girl went to hit Kiba only for him to attempt to dodge backwards. However, as he started to leap, he hit a barrier and bounced off it right into the pathway of Kaneko's fist. "Oh, and no dodging or evading," the giant growled, lowering the barrier. Head pounding and stomach churning, Kiba thought of Naruto and pushed himself up once again. It was going to be a long week. Back to present. Riser's bishop grew more and more panicked the closer the pawn became. It was ridiculous, no knight should be able to continue with the damage he had sustained, even if he was a pawn. His stomach was covered in ice from the first hit, and he had multiple minor injuries all over his body. Yet, he kept on coming, growing closer and closer. With an angry yell, the bishop redoubled her efforts only for Kiba to cut through them. The spells he cut through did nothing, they simply faded out, soaring past him. That gave her an idea. Kiba was steadily working his way closer and closer. In just a few seconds the bishop would be within striking range, and he'd be able to strike her. After that he could take a short breather. As he was thinking this, Kiba kept cutting through spells unconsciously. However, as he cut one, he was surprised to see large clouds of grey smoke billow out. Before his body could react, he had cut through 2 more, which sent even more smoke billowing out. The smoke surrounded him on all sides, blocking his view, although he was able to breathe fine. It was more of a dense fog than smoke, he realized. However, he couldn't be distracted and lunged forward towards where the bishop had been. Whether through luck or sheer coincidence, he felt one of his swords connect and heard a scream of pain in response. Rushing forward, he found the bishop on the ground looking up at him. She clutched her left side with her left hand where he saw blood leaking out. The other hand lay harmlessly on the ground. All around them the fog began to dissipate until they were back under the artificial sky. The wound was serious, but not life-threatening, Kiba thought looking at it. In a few moments she would be retired. He turned to walk away, but she called after him. "Hey, wait." He turned to look at her. "How were you able to take all that damage?" she asked. "Knights don't have much endurance, and I know you never reached the schoolhouse to promote into a rook or queen. But you shouldered those hits and kept coming." "How?" Kiba offered her a grin. "With training." Saying he began to walk away only to hear her laugh behind him. He looked back, suspicious. "Really? Training? That's great. Only you're too much of a gentleman." Kiba looked at her in confusion. "If you'd finished me off or even stabbed me in the leg I would have been retired." The bishop laughed at him. "Instead you stayed here and answered my question. You're the perfect gentleman, which is why you're going to lose." Kiba looked at her in confusion as the grin on her face widened. It was only then he noticed the blue magic circle she'd been hiding under her right hand growing. He recognized it as an area of effect spell, one that would cause large spikes of ice to erupt from the ground all around the circle. The more magic put into it, the larger the area it would affect, and the bishop on the verge of retiring was putting in everything she had left. Without his knight speed, Kiba had no hope of escaping it in time. His only chance was to cause the bishop to retire before she could get the spell off. Rushing forward, he swung his sword at her arm. She was right, any injury, no matter how superficial, would be enough to retire her now. However, just as he was about to connect the bishop jinned as she released the spell, causing it to take effect. The Duke of Beelzebub's voice once again rang out over the battlefield. "Riser's bishop has retired. One of Naruto's pawns has retired. Riser's bishop has retired. One of Naruto's pawns has retired." Hearing the announcement, Kiyum looked over to where just a moment ago Kiba and Riser's bishop Mihi had been fighting. To her shock, the entire area was coated in a thick sheet of ice, with large spikes sprouting from the ground for a good 40 feet in every direction. The sheer number of icicles pointed at the sky made it clear that anyone in the area of the spell would have been killed, or rather retired. Naruto and Grayfia had reassured Kiyum several times during training that pieces were retired once they'd taken sufficient damage so that they wouldn't be killed, and that doctors stood ready to treat all injuries. Either way, it was clear that Kiba was out of the game, but he hadn't gone out without a fight. He'd taken the bishop down with him. With renewed determination, Kiyum turned back to her fight. She wouldn't disappoint Kiba or Naruto. She was going to win against these two pawns, no matter what the cost. She had to, otherwise her training, her effort, all of it would amount to nothing, and she would be no closer to her final goal of beating Saji. As she watched a blue-headed catgirl, Nai went to strike her summoned monster with an uppercut, while her sister, the red-headed Lee, attempted to ambush it from the side. However, both attacks amounted to nothing as the monster simply leaned back to avoid the uppercut, the momentum of which propelled Nai into the air, where the monster punched her in her now exposed side. Nai was sent hurling backwards, but turned her landing into a controlled roll, ending up on all fours like a cat. As for Lee, a strike from the monster's tail sent her flying where she landed on her back next to her sister. The girls got up groaning in pain, complaining the entire time. "A snake, would it have to be a snake?" Nai said as she stood up, shivering slightly. Yeah, if she was going to summon something she could have gone with cute and cuddly, but no, she had to go and summon a fucking snakelity. Lee said in complete agreement with her twin. Together they faced down the lamia in front of them. The upper part of the lamia's body was that of an attractive woman with black waist-length hair, pointed ears, and large breasts. From the waist down, the monster had the body of a giant serpent between 15 and 17 feet in length that was covered in red scales. The only clothing the monster girl wore were black gloves that reached up past her elbows and a black workout bra over her impressive assets, which the catgirls were angry to see were larger than their own. The monster was named Mia and was the first monster that Kiyum had forged a contract with when she was only 7 years old. Since then, Mia had been Kiyum's constant companion, and their relationship had only gotten stronger over time as Kiyum had trained her. Mia was also the strongest monster physically that Kiyum had a contract with, which was why she was using her against the two catgirls, whose boxing gloves made it clear they were physical fighters. "Come on, Mia. We can do this," Kiyum called out encouragingly. The snake girl had been fighting the twins for several minutes now, and although the catgirls hadn't been able to inflict any major damage on the lamia, Kiyum could see that they were beginning to tire her out due to the fact that Mia had to shift her large body every time she made a move to counter the pawn's quick attacks. The bright side, however, was that Mia had been able to hit the girls every time they attacked, and each of her punches carried the strength of a circus strongman. The catgirls hadn't promoted to rook or queen, so at the moment it seemed that the fight hung on whose endurance gave out first. Biting her lip, Kiyum tried to think of ways to help her monster, but her mind came back with nothing. It seemed all she could do was cheer Mia on and hope that she would come out triumphant. "This isn't working," Lee complained, shaking her head to get her red hair out of her eyes. Yeah, we need a new strategy, the cool-headed Nai said as she analyzed the situation. Drawing a blank she looked around for ideas and noticed the ice field where Mihi and the pawn with the sword had fought. She knew that the fill-in pawn didn't have the magic capacity for such a spell, which meant that Mihi had cast it, knowing that it would end in both of them being retired. Nai's eyes widened from a sudden strike of inspiration, but they returned to normal as she accepted the plan as the most likely way to beat the monster, even if she didn't like the cost. Turning she looked at her sister, her face unreadable even to her twin. If I give you an opening, do you think you can knock her out? Of course I can. Lee said, angry that her sister thought so little of her and her abilities. Be it the Lamia or her master, if I had an opening I'd be able to one-shot either of them, Lee said with a confident smirk. I'll give you an opening, Nai said softly, before she ran charging at the monster head-on, so use it. The Lamia swung its tail around, but Nai ducked under it, dodging to the monster's left where the tail had swung from. Lee expected her sister to launch herself at the monster's now wide-open side, it was the strategy they normally used, but instead Nai kept going. Lee's eyes widened as she realized her sister wasn't targeting the monster, she was targeting the pawn who'd summoned her. Realizing Nai's goal, Kiam stumbled backwards, falling on her back with her hand outstretched in a desperate attempt to shield herself, as Nai rose up to quickly finish her. However, as Nai brought her fist back she found herself unable to move. The Lamia's tail had wrapped around her, immobilizing her legs and one of her arms. Then the tail began to tighten. Lee stayed silent and still despite her instincts telling her to go help as she realized what her sister had done. By attacking the Lamia's master she had turned its attention fully to her, driving any thought of Lee from the monster's head. Knowing what she had to do, Lee began to gather her life force, her Kai into her body, strengthening her. She would only have one shot at this, so she had to make it count. As her sister cried out in pain, Lee began to work her way forward using her cat stealth to its fullest as she stalked her prey. An attack from the back would only injure the Lamia, it wouldn't be enough to down her, but she trusted her sister. Nai had promised her an opening, and she would make one, Lee just needed to be ready to capitalize on it. The Lamia, Mia, had made one mistake when she trapped the catgirl who'd been foolish enough to launch a lone assault on her master. She had immobilized all of her limbs except for one, the arm that had been drawn back to punch Kiam. In her hurry to wrap the girl up, Mia hadn't seen reason to coil around the lone limb, instead focusing on immobilizing her body. Nai had counted on this, and as the coils tightened around her, she put her only movable arm on Mia's tail. She'd gotten the idea from Mihi, having seen the results of the attack that had brought down both her and Naruto's knightly pawn. To use such a spell meant the knightly pawn had bested her, so Mihi had taken him out at the cost of her likely weakened self. While Nai wasn't keen on the idea of a suicide attack, she knew that if she and her sister had stuck to their traditional tag-teaming strategy, they would have lost. The Lamia would have eventually caught one of them, and the other wouldn't have lasted long, with the monster's attention focused solely on her. The only reason they'd been able to fight as long as they did was because they'd been able to coordinate attacks in the way only people who have been fighting together for years could, making the Lamia change its focus from one to the other, never staying with one target. Gritting her teeth in pain, Nai summoned a magic circle to her hand. Not planning to stick around, she forced all of her magic reserved into it, growing the spell until it was larger than the coil it was being cast on. Nai's body hid the spell from Kiam, while the red color of the spell hid it from Mia, as it matched her scales, and her focus was on her prisoner. Mia just assumed that the catgirl was trying to escape, although since her hand merely rested on her tail, she was more likely accepting her fate. As the coils tightened once again, finally cracking bone, Nai let out a scream filled with all her pain, anger, and frustration as she set the spell off at point-blank range. The resulting explosion would have made Yubaluna proud and sent shockwaves throughout the entire battlefield. Wind whipped through Sirzechs and Kaori's hair as their swords clashed in the woods. On the other side of the track field, Yui and Carloman both planted their swords in the ground to steady themselves, although they remained standing. As Akeno and Yubaluna dueled in the sky, the wind caused them to flap their wings to keep from being blown about like leaves in a fall gale. The explosion itself consumed both Mia and Nai. Nai's body took in most of the force that would have hit Kiam, although the pressure from the explosion still threw the summoner backwards, where she lay stunned. As for Mia, her scales acted like armor protecting her tail from major damage, although a few of those upon which the spell had been cast cracked from the force. However, Mia's unprotected upper body didn't fare as well. From the waist up her skin was charred black, and all her clothing had been burnt off with the tiniest bit of cloth, somehow remaining to protect her modesty. Her eyes were open in a blank stare, appearing dead to the world. As for Lee, although she had been forewarned for something, the explosion still sent her sprawling head over heels, dispelling the Kai she gathered. She stood up clutching her side, the tumbling felt like it had cracked a rib, and began to slowly make her way over to where the last of Naruto's pawns lay. Her eardrums having burst from her closeness to the blast, she didn't hear Beelzebub's announcement, although she knew it was there. One of Riser's pawns has retired. As she stumbled past the still upright form of the Lamia, it slowly came tumbling forward to block her path. Lee let out a weak cough, the closest sound to a chuckle she could produce at the moment. Even at death's door, the beast still tried to protect its master. As she stepped around it, she tripped as something grabbed her ankle. Looking back down the length of her body, she saw the Lamia looking at her with the eyes of one who was half asleep, although the faint glimmer of life could be seen inside of them. Angrily, Lee lashed out with her leg, kicking the monster repeatedly in the face, while it made no move to protect itself. However, the beast, for all its strength, was overcome by its wounds and fell, lowering her head to the ground. Unconscious or dead, Lee didn't know or care. Lee tried to pull her foot free, but the monster's grip held strong, a last act to delay her. With an air of frustration, Lee turned so she was in a sitting position to manually remove the Lamia's fingers from her ankles, unaware that Kiam was recovering. Flashback. Kiam panted as she faced her king's mother, Grayfia. She was the third queen Kiam had met, but she could already understand why she had the nickname the strongest queen. Grayfia was ruthless when it came to training. Though Kiam had been a devil for less than half a week, Grayfia seemed determined to pound the basics of spellcraft into her. Upon arrival, after handing out assignments and pairing Naruto's peerage up with the members of Sirzechs, Grayfia had taken Kiam for personal training. Day 1 had consisted of Kiam sitting on a stump for hours, reaching inside of herself to sense and manipulate her demonic power. Kiam had struggled with the concept. Human magician casts spells using complex calculation and formulas, but that was different from what she did. As a tamer, all she did was make contracts with monsters and beasts that the two sides considered to be of the same value for that particular creature's service. She'd never touched any other part of magic except summoning, and even then she'd only done it to summon Naruto. When she'd finally found her demonic power inside of her in the late hours of the evening, Kiam had almost retreated from it. The power was wild, volatile, constantly shifting and never holding still. Kiam had almost retreated from it, but as she thought of Naruto, she knew that she had to overcome the challenge for him, so without further ado, Kiam had grasped her power and bent it to her will. The realization had led Kiam to realize that she now had the power to not only use summoning and contract magic, she could actually learn to cast spells with her demonic power, something she had never been able to do as a summoner focused on contracts. The second day of training, Kiam had expected to have some practical exercises with Grayfia, but instead she'd been led to the library where Grayfia had forced her to read books covering spellcraft until she'd memorized all the things Grayfia considered important for a servant of Gremory to know. Kiam thought that meant an hour looking through the beginner's guide to spellcraft, mostly looking at pictures, but she'd instead been forced to read several dusty tomes written before her grandparents had been born. She'd even been forced to take notes. This had gone on until dinner, after which Grayfia had given her another book to read until Kiam went to bed. When she'd fallen asleep, Kiam could see the words and spells that had been drilled into her floating around her dreamscape. Needless to say, that hadn't made the top 10 list of Kiam's most restful night's sleep. The rest of the week consisted of the practical training Kiam had desired, but she quickly came to regret ever wanting. Fighting Grayfia was like fighting a god, an angry god that kept throwing fireballs at you. Kiam, of course, hadn't been allowed to use promotion because, as Grayfia put it, whoever said you would get the time to promote mid-battle. This had led to hours of Kiam running around dodging the large explosion spells Grayfia endlessly lobbed her way, while she desperately tried to buy time for a counterattack. Whenever she got a chance, Kiam would try to tap into her demonic energy to try to launch a spell she'd learned from the previous day, only to be interrupted by another spell before she could make any progress. This had gone on for days, but Kiam had improved. By the end of the week, she was dodging and weaving like it was an art, shooting basic elemental spells at Grayfia as if it was the most natural thing in the world. On the train back to the human world, when Akeno had curiously asked what had led to her increase in magical skill and agility, Kiam had looked at her with the eyes of one who had just emerged from hell. To survive. I had to learn to survive. After that statement, she didn't speak for the rest of the trip, although she trembled occasionally from memories visible only to her. Back to present. Kiam sat up, woozy from her head hitting the ground, probably a concussion, she thought groggily as she looked around confused. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw Mia, collapsed on the ground, with the red-headed catgirl kneeling next to her, although from where she lay Kiam couldn't see what she was doing. From her position, Kiam could see that Mia was unconscious, she hoped, while the catgirl had her back to the pawn, fully focused on her task. Kiam had lots of magical power left, having only used it so far to summon Poppy and Mia. Knowing she'd only get one chance, Kiam prepared a magic circle targeting her opponent's exposed back. Lee grinned as she finally unwrapped the last of the Lamia's fingers from her leg. "You were a worthy opponent," she admitted softly. "We were too confident and underestimated you guys. Judging by how the rating game's going, all of us did. We won't make the same mistake in the future." Riser Sama will see to that. Lee turned to face where the summoner had been lying only to receive the fireball to the chest, right where her cracked rib was, causing her to fall down. Well, that's broken now, the pawn thought absent-mindedly as she spat out a small amount of blood, having bitten her tongue. As she glared at the summoner standing before her, she flashed an evil Cheshire grin. She was on the edge of being retired, every breath hurt, and her vision was blurry, but the least she could do was take out this pawn before she did. Guillaume cursed in her head. Her spell had been a direct hit, and from what she could see of her opponent, it had done quite a bit of damage, based on how her opponent seemed to be struggling to breathe. As the catgirl ran at her, Guillaume quickly summoned a defensive spell which the pawn collided with. She'd been surprised earlier by the blue-haired girl's sudden attack which had caused her to panic, but this time she was ready. As the pawn's fist bounced off the barrier spell, her chest opened up as she drew back her arm for another punch, leaving her briefly exposed. After a week of training, Guillaume recognized the opening and quickly sent a spell into it, this time a lightning bolt which sent the girl falling backwards. To Guillaume's amazement, as she fell, the girl vanished in a flash of blue light. Beelzebub's voice rang out emotionless, "Riser's pawn has retired." Hearing the announcement, Guillaume looked at her hands in excitement. She'd done it, she'd beaten 2 pawns despite being only worth 1. Naruto was going to be proud of her, just as proud as Guillaume was of Mia. Mia. Guillaume recalled, quickly running over to her monster's side. The Lamia lay unconscious, her breath coming in quick fits. As Guillaume watched, her chest quit rising and fell silent. Why aren't they doing anything, Guillaume thought in a panic. Why aren't they retiring her? She's participating in the raiding game, she's a devi. Her mind calmed as it realized the issue. She's not a devil, I am, Guillaume said aloud. Mia was merely a part of Guillaume's abilities, one of her powers. The devils wouldn't help unless Guillaume was retired or resigned. I'm sorry, Naruto, Guillaume thought as a tear ran down her cheek. I want to stay and help, but I need to help Mia. Besides, there should only be a few pieces left, and I don't think I'm strong enough to fight anything other than pawns, yet. With a saddened expression, Guillaume declared her resignation and vanished along with Mia. The emotionless voice of Beelzebub once again rang out, Naruto's pawn has resigned. In the forest near the track field, sparks flew as Kaori and Sirzechs crossed swords, glaring at each other over the blades, each smiling demonically. I read about your sacred gear in the Phoenix library, Sirzechs declared smugly, breaking the deadlock and knocking a swipe of Kaori's blade away. Momentum pillage, isn't it? A fragment of the white dragon's sacred gear. As long as you don't touch me with your weapon, you can't drain my speed, so all I need to do is avoid the blade, and victory will be mine. Kaori had noticed a difference in Sirzechs from the moment they'd first started this battle. Compared to their dojo duel, Sirzechs wasn't underestimating her, she knew what Kaori was capable of and was doing everything within her power to avoid the Gremory Knight's blade. Kaori couldn't help herself as the two once again locked swords, a Cheshire grin slipped out. Careful, Sirzechs, the last time we fought you underestimated me and look where that got you. Now here you are doing it all over again. I'm not underestimating you, Sirzechs declared, her face while angry was controlled. Last time I thought you were a weakling not even worthy of fighting me, now I know what you can do. Victory will go to me, it has to, I know what you're capable of. There's no way in hell you win this fight. It's impossible, the knight's prideful declaration was cut off mid-sentence due to a sudden blow to the gut, causing Sirzechs to backtrack so she could recover. This meant Sirzechs had a clear view as the white and blue stubs on Kaori's back glowed, sucking away half her speed. Wasiri's voice was cut off as Kaori launched herself at the knight, not swinging her sword, but drawing her hand back to punch her. Surprised at the unexpected move, Sirzechs raised her sword to counter, but it moved slower than it should have, so she was unable to avoid being hit in the face, which sent her tumbling backwards. Looking up, she once again saw her opponent standing above her. Confidently, Kaori strode forward towards her downed opponent. You may have read about my sacred gear in a book, Sirzechs, but Akita-sensei has fought 2 of its previous wielders in the past. From what he told me, one was a rook devil that went stray, and another was a human that got too cocky and sought out fights from opponents stronger than he should have. They were pains in the butt for him to deal with as a knight, but from what he told me, both used their fists rather than a weapon to steal their opponent's speed. It took me a while, but I finally was able to do it. Now all I need to do is touch my opponent with my sword or body to drain their speed. Kaori explained as she looked down at the knight which had attacked her and her friend. Sirzechs didn't even try to get up from the ground, she knew she was defeated, any more fighting would just give Kaori more speed and make her more dangerous to her master. The best thing she could do was. Irisig, Sirzechs' voice unexpected cry began, but Kaori was quick to react, hitting the downed knight in the face with the weighted end of her Shitatsu Kota, knocking the knight out from the heavy blow as blood flew from her now broken nose and shattered mouth. As the wing stubs that protruded from her shoulder blades glowed a third time, the Phoenix Knight turned blue and vanished. Riser's knight is retired. That was for what you tried to do to us, Kaori said softly, looking at where just a moment ago her opponent had lain. Shaking her head to rid herself of her dark thoughts, she focused on the game. Beelzebub had declared during her fight that Riser had lost 2 pawns and a bishop, while Naruto had lost his 2 pawns, but no announcements had come through about the knights. Running in the direction of the track field, Kaori could only hope that she made it in time to help her friend. If their original plan for dealing with Riser failed, everything would come down to Yui. The track field looked very different from how it had first appeared. Half of the field was the same as before, with the exception of clashing metal as 2 foes fought. The other half looked like it had just been through wars and that had somehow taken place in both a desert and an Arctic cave. Yui ducked below Carloman's blade and swung at her opponent's left leg, although her katana merely bounced off her armor. Carloman was skilled, but Yui had remained calm and was able to break down her style. There were few openings to take advantage of, but they were there. The problem was the openings only allowed her to target Carloman's armor, which was becoming a pain in the ass to deal with, especially considering her choice of outfit left her with plenty of exposed skin. After a few more quick exchanges of blades, Yui finally saw what she wanted and swung not at Carloman's flesh. Her style didn't allow that, but rather at her chestplate, which allowed Naruto's knight to leave a long scar across the armor. With a demonic grin, Yui quickly jumped out of range of Carloman's sword, her smile not once leaving her face. "Why dost thou run away?" Carloman asked, pointing her sword at her opponent. "Does thou not have the strength to see our duel through to the end?" The knight's old-fashioned talking amused her opponent, who responded with a dark laugh. "I'm not running away, I'm here for the show." Carloman looked confused, unsure of her opponent's next move. She decided to play along. "Very well then, show me what thou can do." The immediate laughter to her response made the knight think in the back of her mind, I may have just made a mistake. Her thought was proven correct when white medical bandages appeared on her opponent's forearms. Her question of what they were was only met with a dark promise of, "You'll see." Her pink-haired foe brought the thumb and middle finger on her left hand together and snapped. Then Carloman's armor exploded. Flashback. "I know what your sacred gear is." Yui looked at her king in shock. They'd been at the training camp for 2 days, and Naruto had been holed up in either the library or his room the entire time, only coming out for meals or to look over the group's training. Rias had been acting as the leader in his place, going from group to group and delivering Naruto's orders or advice, as well as bringing various books to the young king. Yui quickly focused on her master as he continued. "It was hard to find. No sacred gear that matches the appearance of yours was in the books I read or was written about by my family in the past." He flashed her a playboy grin. "I actually found the answer in the Bible, believe it or not." Pulling out the holy book, he showed her a passage from 2 Kings. It described a story of a man sickened by disease who was wrapped in bandages that was healed by a prophet. After reading it over, Yui looked at her king's expectant face in confusion. "Okay, I get that he was sick and wore bandages, but how does that connect to me?" Her question only made her master smile wider. "It wasn't a matter of him being healed that caught my attention, but rather the fact that he wore bandages. Additionally, the disease he had spread quickly. Within weeks it went from a small wound to covering his entire body." Seeing his knight's confused look, Naruto sighed. "I think he had a sacred gear that he unconsciously used on himself. It wouldn't have been as powerful due to him using it unknowingly, but it would explain the speed at which the disease worsened." Seeing that he wasn't getting anywhere, Naruto left the room, gesturing at Yui to follow him. The pair made their way to the nearby forest, with Grayfia and Rias following the pair to see what Naruto had discovered. The quartet stopped in front of a giant oak more than 50 feet high with a trunk that was thick enough to fit a car seat inside. "Okay, now activate your sacred gear." Yui quickly complied as the bandages wrapped around her arms and cut the tree. Not knowing where Naruto was going, but deciding to trust in him anyway, Yui obliged, making a quick horizontal cut as she drew her katana, just as Akita-sensei had taught her. "Great, now focus on the cut with your mind. Try to understand the wound, how it affects the tree. Does it damage it? Is it life-threatening or will it heal?" Unsure but wanting to understand her heavenly endowed power, Yui tried to do as he said. "It's a gash in the tree," she couldn't help but think. Looking at it, she saw bits of sap leaking out. "It's not a threat to the tree, it'll heal in time." Yui's thoughts turned to what the wound would be like to a more human, or rather demonic opponent. It would be on their chest, just above their navel. It'd be a horizontal cut, not deep enough to hit any organs or to cause them to spill out, but still a solid cut that would make it painful for them to move. Her thoughts turned to Riser, what it would be like if the cut was on him. Suddenly she felt a burning on her forearms where the sacred gear met her skin. As the 4 of them watched, the wound, which had been no more than 4 inches deep into the tree, began to deepen and spread. In moments it was more than a foot into the tree, and the gash was long enough to take up an entire side of the trunk. As they watched in astonishment, the cut worsened until the entire tree began to lean backwards, then fell with a loud crash. "What was that?" Rias was the first one to ask, turning to look at Naruto, who was wearing a self-satisfied grin on his face. That was her sacred gear. It doesn't have a name that I could find, so I'm going to call it Naman's bandages after the first wielder, although it may be nothing more than a guess. Best I could hypothesize her sacred gear worsens wounds and injuries causing them to spread. It would explain how Yui was also able to injure Riser after his hand healed. The Phoenix powers heal the wounds through magic, but physically they're still there, even for a moment. Yui just worsened the wound as it was healing, and it cut his hand off again. Looking unnerved, Riaz turned to the knight who was still looking at the downed tree in shock. In other words, she might be the only way to beat Riser. Naruto nodded his head solemnly as his knight turned to look at him. I actually have another plan to deal with him, but if it doesn't work then Yui's the one it'll most likely come down to. What's the plan? Riaz asked curiously, but was only met by a shared glance between Naruto and Grayfia, who was wearing a slight grin. That made Riaz worry for a second. Anything that made the Ice Queen smile was probably not good for whoever it was affecting. Back to present. Harleman was blushing furiously as she looked at Yui with fear and unhindered rage in her eyes. One arm was held protectively over her now bare chest, while the other waved her sword around wildly. You. Shameless. Pervert. Eki. She called out. Yui only looked on with a raised eyebrow as the knight who had been so self-confident and respectful only moments ago was now reduced to a sputtering mess, wearing only boots and a headband swinging a sword around. Do you want to fight or surrender? Yui called out as she looked at the nude knight clad only in booties. She almost said a quick prayer to whatever deity kept Naruto from being there to see the knight, but stopped herself fearing a sudden migraine. Besides, Kaori would kill her if she turned Naruto back into the pervert he'd been in middle school. The fear of Naruto resorting back to his perverted nature was something the two knights feared, especially considering that he was now their master. They knew it was there, they caught the occasional glances Naruto flashed the pair, but glances were fine. Yui would never admit it, but she'd even put herself in some compromising positions over the week, so Naruto would be rewarded with a special treat if he looked at her at the right time. Yui was broken from her thoughts by a sudden call from her foe. I resign. As she watched the last Phoenix Knight turn blue and vanished, her glare of hatred and a dark promise of future conflict should the two meet left unsaid as she protectively clutched her chest. Riser's knight is resigned, came the expected announcement from Beelzebub. As soon as the knight vanished from sight, Kaori emerged from the woods running onto the field. She quickly reached her friend, especially with the help of her knight speed. Unfortunately for Yui, the look Kaori gave her made it clear she'd caught sight of the nude girl before she vanished. I can explain, she quickly said before her friend could draw any conclusions. The raised eyebrow at the response had her explaining in a quick burst. I scratched her armor and then worsened the injury with my sacred gear. It destroyed the armor. How was I supposed to know that she wasn't wearing anything underneath? Thankfully the eyebrow returned to its normal resting place. Can you still use your sacred gear? Kaori asked her friend, quickly getting back to business. During the week of training they discovered that it was incredibly draining for Yui to use her ability, since it drew on her stamina reserves and her magic, which, while increased due to being a devil, was lower than what a bishop or promoted pawn possessed. I'm good, Yui said, sheathing her katana which was still drawn. How about you? I assume you dealt with Sirzechs. Her friend nodded, although she had an expression Yui recognized as the one she wore when she was mad at herself. Yeah, I took care of her, although I was only able to drain her 3 times. Thankfully I kept it even after she was retired. I was worried I'd lose it. The loud explosion made the two knights whirl around to look towards the principal's office, where they could see smoke rising in the distance. The two looked at each other and then, without a word, took off in the direction of the enemy's base, the name of their king, the most prominent thing in their minds. The Keno looked down at the queen that lay on the ground before her. The devil servant of Riser, known as the Bomb Queen, glared up at the Priestess of Thunder, a slight smirk on her face. Priestess of Thunder, you're indeed formidable, the violet-haired big-breasted queen said to the floating priestess, who looked at her foe with a sadistic grin. But you lose, your magic is already depleted, and though you may be fine with a little rest, you won't get the chance to. The Keno put a finger to the corner of her mouth, her smile not dimming in the slightest. If anything it grew bigger. Ara, it seems like my lightning caused you to become delusional. It seems I'll need to retire you quickly so you can see the doctors. Keno said in mock concern, though a glance at her grin would let anyone know that she was enjoying herself. Oh, there's no need for that, priestess. The bottle filled with a red liquid that the Bomb Queen held up caused Keno to visibly do a second take. As I said, you lose. The next announcement from Beelzebub was something of a shock to Naruto's peerage. Naruto's queen has retired. Earlier. Naruto looked at the girl standing before him in the breezeway and let out an annoyed growl. When he, Yui, and Kaori had left the orc building, he'd sent the two knights to go help out his pawns at the track field, while he went to help his surrogate queen who'd been fighting Ubaluna. From the videos he'd watched of Riser's previous matches, despite Ubaluna being classified as a low-class devil, her explosive magic was that of a mid-class bordering on the verge of high class. The only reason Naruto could think of for her low status was Riser either not wanting to reveal her true power or, and the more likelier option in his opinion, not being able to stand having a peerage member the same rank as him, especially the one Naruto assumed was his primary sleeping companion based on what he'd seen in the orc. Normally Naruto wouldn't have worried as much, Akeno's holy lightning was very effective when dealing with devils and fallen angels, but he was more worried about the fact that none of his peerage members had reported seeing any of the opposing pieces using Phoenix Tears. The medicine that only the Phoenix household could produce, Naruto suspected that Riser had brought at least one into the game, having seen him do exactly that in one of the tapes he'd watched. The fact that in the video it had been given to Yubaluna hadn't eased his concerns in the slightest, only making him work late into the night during training week to determine Riser's most likely strategy. It had been fairly simple to determine what an arrogant, overconfident man like Riser would do. He'd want an overwhelming victory just to show how outmatched the son of a Satan was compared to him. To make sure of that, Naruto believed that Riser would want to bring in his family's medicine that could heal all wounds and restore magical power, but Riser's overconfidence wouldn't allow him to bring in the maximum 2 that he was allowed. Naruto suspected that Riser would give the tears to Yubaluna like he'd done previously, but he didn't tell his peerage his suspicions. If he revealed what he suspected, then they would hold back when they fought her, something Naruto knew from his homework could be a fatal mistake. Using this and the information he'd gained from constantly rewatching Riser's previous games had allowed Naruto to so far in the raiding game to consistently predict his opponent's moves, and the fact that he'd been able to carve up Riser's forces like he was a butcher with a carving knife hadn't escaped his notice. What he hadn't counted on was Riser sending one of his pieces to protect his queen in case of interference. That was a surprise, and looking over the woman's shoulder watching the queen's battle, Naruto wondered for a moment if he had played Riser or if Riser had played him. He was shaken out of his thoughts by the woman in front of him cracking her neck and shaking her limbs out, clearly warming up. Is this one of Riser's plans? Naruto asked, fishing for information from the look-to-be punk. With spiky light brown hair adorned with red highlights on the front, an army green jacket that showed off her midriff and emphasized her assets, as well as black jeans with a section cut off on her right leg that showed her right thigh and part of her butt cheek, the woman seemed to be the devil equivalent of the stereotypical rebel. The stereotype was only made more obvious with a half mask on the woman's face that covered her nose but left her mouth bare, in addition to the black fingerless fighting gloves and black combat boots. She looked like she either causes trouble or brings it with her wherever she goes, Naruto couldn't help but think. The woman shook her head and flashed him a grim smile. No, Riser-sama ordered me to go to the track field with the others. However, I wondered why you let your queen engage Yubaluna, so I asked for permission to go guard her in the unlikely chance that she was actually a ploy. Since you're here, it looks like my guess was correct. Naruto's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly hid it behind a playboy grin. Oh, so this was your idea, not Riser's. How were you able to get him to let you do this? Based on what I know, Riser's not the type of guy to take advice from others, even if they're subservient to him. Her reveal that she had been the one to see through his actions upped the woman in Naruto's book a few spots. If it was her idea, then the plan would likely work. The appraising look the woman gave Naruto did not escape his notice, but he waited for her answer. In their physical battle, it was better to let her make the first move, especially considering that she was likely a rook since she was cracking her knuckles. As for their mental spar, she was clearly defensive, not wanting to give away information, but having spent years studying women in elementary and middle school, Naruto was learning far more from her than she knew. I suggested that sending 2 knights, 2 pawns, and a bishop to deal with a pair of knights and pawns was more than enough. I asked him to let me go protect Yubaluna in case one of you was sent to try and steal her Phoenix Tears. The reveal only confirmed Naruto's grim belief at the reality of the situation, but at the moment he was more distracted by the woman in front of him. What's your name? He asked, genuinely curious. The woman responded without hesitation, I am Isabella, Riser-sama's rook and the one who will end this game by bringing you down. So saying, the newly named Isabella launched herself at the young king, which was just what Naruto had been waiting for. With a single spell, the natural ice magic he'd inherited from his mother flowed out, covering the rook. In less than a second, the entire hallway was made of ice with a giant block of it around the woman with only her head exposed. Knowing she couldn't move, Naruto strode forward to knock her out. Before that happened, though, an announcement came through from Beelzebub: Naruto's queen has retired. Causing Naruto to clench his right hand into a fist in anger. If he hadn't had to deal with this rook, he would have been able to help Akeno, but now she was gone. All that remained of the 2 teams were Riser and Yubaluna against Naruto and his knights, with Naruto having a sinking feeling that Riser's queen was now healed and her magic restored. The sneeze made him turn back to the punk he'd frozen. Sorry, Isabella said, a slight blush on her face. That made Naruto raise an eyebrow, although he didn't allow his cold expression to show it. She was apologizing to him. You look like you're a good king who cares for his pieces. I know I'm not a member of your peerage, but for what it's worth, I hope to fight you again under better circumstances. I enjoyed our fight even if I didn't even get a chance to actually, well, fight. Something about the heartfelt sincerity of the girl caused Naruto to relax, and to the frozen girl's surprise, he actually chuckled. I hope to fight you again as well, although I can't promise that the result will be any different. But before you go, can I ask, has Riser ever done it with you? The brown hair adorned with red twisted as the girl shook her head. No, Riser-sama has had slumber parties with us where we all sleep together, but he's never actually done it with me. He mainly does the deed with you, Baluna, Mihi, and the pawns, excluding Mira and the green twins, of course. Oh, of course he's never laid his hands on Ravel-sama either. If he did that, I would kill him, Naruto growled. The imprisoned Rook shivered at the cold gaze he used when he looked down at her. The look in his eyes made it clear to the woman, Ravel belonged to him, anyone who tried to do anything to her would answer to him, and they would most likely not make it out alive. The look made it clear to anyone who could see his eyes at the moment that this was the son of the strongest queen, and unbeknownst to the pair back in the observation box, where Naruto's family sat with the Phoenix family, Grayfia let the smallest of smiles cross her compassed face. Sirzechs meanwhile shivered in inherent fear. He'd seen that look on his wife, and he immediately pitied anyone Naruto directed that look towards in the future. He knew that they would not enjoy the following moments. Knowing he needed to continue on, Naruto couldn't help but ask the trapped Rook one last question before she was retired. Already the blue light was beginning to appear, and Naruto knew the two had only moments left. Why do you serve Riser? He asked. A part of the agreement between the two kings back in the Orc had come to his mind, but he wanted to know more before he made a decision. In the end, it might not matter if he lost, but if he won, well, then they'd have to wait and see. I wanted to fight strong opponents. The Rook said, looking at the king who'd bested her. I used to lead a gang when I was human, and one evening we decided to rob a blonde rich-looking teen we found standing in an alleyway. We were starving and needed the money. Her eyes took on a Fargan look as Naruto saw her relive the moments, her voice turning bland and emotionless. He destroyed us, wiped us out and burned everyone alive. I was the only one left, and then the monster came over and kneeled down next to me where I lay dying in that dark alley. He asked me if I feared death, and in that moment, I did. I'd done bad things, you had to, in order to rise to the top and keep your members' respect. I was afraid and he offered me a choice, but I was weak. My followers died because of me, the people I hung out with and grew up with, my sisters. And I didn't even have the courage to lead them to the afterlife, to whatever hell awaited us. I failed them. What kind of leader was I? With those final words, the Rook's head dropped down, her chin knocking against her frozen prison, as a single tear slid down from the eye not covered by the mask. Then in a flash of blue light the woman was gone, leaving an empty block of ice, against which a young king stood looking at his own reflection. Riser's Rook has retired, Beelzebub's calm emotionless voice rang out. For a moment all was quiet, and then with a brutal roar of fury, Naruto gathered to his fist the power he'd inherited from his father, the power of destruction, and punched the ice cube, annihilating it with the waves of destructive force he emitted. Then with a calm control that only a rare few possessed, Naruto strode outside to the courtyard in front of the new schoolhouse, where Riser and his queen stood waiting. Naruto stopped and looked at the man who he had come to hate. So focused was he that he didn't even acknowledge his knights who walked to stand behind him on either side, Kaori on his right, Yui on his left, his first two pieces. In the observation box, Riaz looked at her nephew with concern, having just returned from checking on her retired peerage members to hear the Rook's tragic backstory. She hadn't known Naruto for long, but she could see how much the story had angered him. Though she hated to admit it, the tale had made a nice tinder, adding to the roaring bonfire of hatred and disgust that she had for her fiancé. He didn't do anything illegal, her father and Naruto's grandfather, Zeoticus Gremory, had told her when she gasped in shock upon hearing the Rook's tale about her past over the screen. He may not have done anything illegal, dear, but that story still doesn't sit right with me. Her mother and Naruto's grandmother Venelana had added. Yes, but she still is quite strong. My son wouldn't have recruited her otherwise, Lord Phoenix said, his arms laying calmly on his armrests as he watched the two young kings face off, glaring at each other in silence. Well, I guess we know which piece Naruto wants, Sirzechs thought, sending his wife a quick glance, who knowing her husband had done the same to him at the exact moment. The looks were brief, but once they were over, anyone who knew the two could see that they were grinning on the inside. If Naruto won, then he and his peerage would have grown quite a bit in strength with their potential new members. What was that look? Sirzechs felt it tugging on his robe and looked to his right to see a young girl in her late teens with black hair tied into twin buns, dressed in the clothes of a magical girl. This was Seraphol Leviathan, one of the four Satans and a close friend of Sirzechs who managed foreign affairs for the underworld. While many found that odd considering that she casually threatened to start a war every other week, Sirzechs knew that she honestly tried her best to keep the peace. Also the fact that she had faced Grayfia for the title of Leviathan and had if not beaten her but been strong enough to hold her own was a major show of her skill. Sirzechs smiled at her and with a grin promised, "If Naruto wins you'll see," which earned him a HMPH from the magical girl as she turned away frustrated. "Naruto-sama won't lose. He's the one I trust with my future and the one I want to serve," the voice of Ravel cut in sharing her thoughts on her wanted master. "He's stronger than my brother, I don't know how he'll do it, but he shall emerge triumphant." Rhea shot the young girl a quick glance. Though she at first hadn't made much of an impact on the young Grimoire heir, she now looked the girl over, moving her up a few places on Rhea's list of people who have shitty relatives she hated but may not be all bad. "Then let's watch and cheer him on," Rhea said, letting a grin of anticipation cross her face. The finale was upon them and nobody wanted to miss it. Collectively all over the underworld and from quite a few screens beyond, faces leaned closer, bodies scooted to get comfortable, and then silence fell as Naruto spoke, shattering the silence. "Riser, let's make this a one-on-one battle," Naruto said, his voice low and controlled. Riser began to laugh. "WHWH, why would I do that?" He managed to get out between gasps for air. "My queen just drank her phoenix tear and is as good as new, she's ready to go, while your pieces on the other hand look worn out." It was true. Despite their calm appearance, Yui's and Kaori's chests were rising and falling rapidly. It was obvious to anyone who noticed that they were clearly tired from their previous fights, which had dragged on for several minutes before they'd beaten the knights. Naruto just let out a devilish grin. "You do it because you're a selfish glory hog who needs the help of a low-class devil to beat the son of a Satan. You say you're so good, so worthy of marrying my aunt, and yet you don't even have the guts to go one-on-one with me. Oh, I feel so sorry for Ravel. Not only does her own brother hit her, but now she has to see that he's too much of a coward to finish the fight," he started. Rage. That was the only word that described Riser in that moment. He was going to kill the talking piece of brown-haired shit that had come out of nowhere to steal his sister. So what if he had pretty ladies serving him and his aunt was his fiancée? It didn't matter. In the end, Riser was a phoenix, the one that flew above all, the immortal bird. If he wanted something, didn't he deserve it? Of course he did. Riser Phoenix was a king. Flaming wings erupted from Riser's back as he launched himself at Naruto, who quickly summoned a wall of ice between them. Riser didn't even slow down, summoning a fireball. He launched it at the obstacle, destroying it. What he didn't expect was the beam of destructive power that hit him square in the face as soon as the ice cleared. Blinded by the sudden loss of his eyes but still able to think through the already healing pain, Riser drew back his arm to punch where he thought Naruto had last been standing. However, the arm never reached because as he thrust it forward, the limb in question was cut off. Naruto smiled. Riser had launched himself at the trio in his rage, leaving his queen in his wake. Ignorant of everything but his target, Riser either didn't notice or take into account that there were two beautiful knights standing right beside their king, and one had stolen 0.875% of one of Riser's knight speed to add to her own. It was a simple matter for Kaori to slice the easy target presented to her. Naruto had given his orders under his breath when he'd thrown up the wall. "Go deal with the queen. Once you injure him, I'll take care of everything else." Not knowing what the plan was, but trusting her master, Kaori did just that with Yui right behind her as they dashed past the winded phoenix. As soon as Riser's arm vanished, Naruto launched the spell that would determine the game. "Cryostasis," he yelled as he cast a blue spell at the stump as it prepared to erupt in flames. Riser felt something hit him, but his eyes were still healing themselves, so he had no idea what it was. However, Naruto's voice had given him away, and Riser charged forward to once again launch a punch at his opponent, only to realize something was wrong. Looking towards the stump where his healed hand should be with his now fully recovered eyes, Riser was shocked by what he saw. The limb was growing back, but what mattered more was the speed it was coming back. The cut wasn't healing in an instant, rather the flesh that would be his new arm was slowly regenerating, instead of bursting into flames like it usually did. After a count of 5, the partially healed limb burst into flames, and everything seemed right again. Only Riser was glaring at his opponent now, not just with rage, but suspicion. "What did you do?" Riser called out as he circled his foe, not wanting to get close until he knew what had happened. His arm had healed, but the fact that it wasn't immediate had made him realize two things. He could be hurt, and he had severely underestimated his opponent. "What's wrong, chicken boy? Not cooked all the way through?" Riser clenched his teeth but didn't attack. He himself would willingly admit to being brash, but he was no fool. He hadn't won his previous games with just power, but with strategy as well. Not knowing what the spell did meant there was only one option. Kaori kneeled on the ground panting. Her will and shinai were the only things that kept her from passing out. Her outfit was torn and her body was littered with burns, but she wasn't out of the fight yet, not as long as she could keep the queen away from her king. As she watched, Yui tried to strike Ubaluna, only to be launched back by an explosion as the queen swiftly dodged then countered. The problem wasn't that they couldn't reach the queen, even with the night trait of her queen piece Kaori was still faster since she'd stolen Sirzechs' speed. The problem lay in that Ubaluna only needed to cast a spell in the duo's general direction to hurt them. While not as powerful as Akeno's lighting, the size of the explosions cast was still damaging to the pair, knocking them back before they could cut her with their swords. Kaori moved to stand in front of the body of her fellow knight ready to defend her, but Ubaluna didn't attack, she just stood there and smiled as she leaned against her staff. It made Kaori furious, but she could do nothing. Hearing Yui struggling to get up, she looked over to see her friend push herself onto shaking legs with her katana, a victorious smile on her face as she looked at their foe. "You alright?" Kaori was a little concerned at how her friend was smiling in this situation. "I cut her," Yui said as Kaori looked at her with disbelief. "Just now when you attacked I followed you. The explosion knocked you back, but you acted as a shield so I could get through. It's small, but I managed to slice her slightly on the left arm. She probably didn't even notice thinking she dodged." Kaori looked at her friend concerned, but she pushed it down. She could worry later. Right now they needed to deal with the queen and then go help Naruto. Kaori could still remember her fight with Riser and how he had destroyed the two knights with almost no effort. Yui may have been human at the time and just awakened her sacred gear, but the ease with which the blonde devil had bested the two still scared Kaori. She may not know how strong her master was, having never seen him go all out against any of the strays they'd fought, but she couldn't help but doubt him. Riser just seemed so invulnerable with his healing ability, and while Naruto had been in constant contact with Sona and Ravel, as the three came up with a plan, she couldn't help but worry that there was no way to best the Phoenix. "Kaori." Yui's shout drew the knight back from her thoughts as she looked at her friend. "You're worrying about him, focus. The longer we take to deal with her," the Pincat nodded at the violet-robed queen, "the longer it'll be before we can go help Naruto." "Refocused," Kaori nodded at her friend. "Do you think you can use your ability on her?" Her friend shot her a grin that made Kaori glad for a moment that she was on Yui's good side. "I can probably use my ability 2 more times, one for the queen and then one on Riser." Kaori nodded as she tensed up, seeing her preparations. The bomb queen stood straight and pointed her staff at the knight with her left arm. "Great, activate it when she tries to hit me." The nod Kaori received was all the provocation she needed as she launched herself at the woman, her sacred gear on her back, feeding her the stolen speed of her first foe. As the knight approached, the bomb queen summoned a magic circle. It had been fun to play with the two, but she should wrap it up and get back to her king soon. However, as soon as the magic circle appeared on the end of her staff, Ubaluna's arm erupted in pain, causing her to almost drop it. A sudden jerk caused her to lose focus on the spell, causing it to go off. Thankfully for her, instead of being pointed straight down, her staff had jerked to point to the left of her target, where it hit a small out-of-the-way building. Glancing towards her opponents, Ubaluna saw the one with the short pink hair on the ground, knees under her, clearly exhausted. Her sword lay next to her discarded, and Ubaluna could see that the knight didn't even have the strength to pick it up. While it was nice to see one opponent clearly out of the fight, the bomb queen was more concerned by the rapidly approaching brunette. As Kaori approached, the bomb queen tried to raise her staff with her right arm, but before she could, the brunette was inside her guard, thrusting with the point of her sword. Time seemed to slow down for Ubaluna as the sword entered her body just under her left breast and pushed upwards towards her heart. Then in a flash of blue light she was gone. "Riser's queen has retired," the now familiar voice of Beelzebub said. Hearing it, Kaori collapsed on her back, hands on her head as she tried to catch her breath. Her sword lying beside her. Looking over, she locked eyes with her childhood friend and the two began to laugh. They'd taken down a queen. Yui opened her mouth to say something and then an earth-rattling explosion rang out. Kaori could only watch mouth agape as her friend vanished in a ball of fire. "One of Naruto's knights has retired," Beelzebub said. Kaori weakly tried to prop herself up, but she was too weak. She didn't even have the strength to lift her sword from where it lay on the ground, although she did grab it. As she watched, a shadow appeared in the flames, growing larger as it came closer. The shadowy figure took on the form of a blonde pimp as it emerged, the flames clinging to his body, but not hurting him. "Riser," Kaori thought with pure fury. The pimp in question looked down at the kneeling knight with an evil grin. "Nice to see you already know the proper posture," he said as he lifted her up by her hair till her feet were off the ground. Kaori weakly tried to swing her sword, but Riser merely grabbed the blade and threw it away. Using his free hand, he raised a finger and waved it back and forth like he was scolding a misbehaving pet. "Ch, that's no way to act, especially to someone who beat your master." Kaori glared at him. "Naruto would never lose to you," she weakly proclaimed. That only made the grin on Riser's face grow wider. "Oh, but he did. He managed to somehow delay my healing, but he couldn't stop it. I'm a phoenix and you idiots can't seem to grasp the fact that I'm immortal. No blade, no magic, no power can harm me. No matter what happens, my flames will heal me. Is that so difficult to understand? Well, he had begun his rant calm enough, he'd ended it yelling at her. Then his maniacal grin was back. I don't know what your king did to me, but the fact that he tried to challenge the superiority of us phoenixes means he needs to be punished. Now I can't directly do anything to you since we're on view to the world, but tell me, if I was to strip you, would you be able to stand beside you king? Would his family allow it? They need to uphold their position after all. Haori gasped as Riser formed a knife out of his flames. Slowly, with almost delicate care, he lowered it to her side where he raised it up and down. Should I start with your chest or your private parts? He asked, a thoughtful look on his face. Haori's face became as stiff as stone as she defiantly looked over his shoulder. It doesn't matter, you'll lose to Naruto. You're just a spoiled little boy who for the first time in his life has met someone that doesn't bend his knee to you. Welcome to the real world, as strong as you think you are, there's always someone stronger. She lowered her eyes to glare directly into Riser's, her gold versus his dark blue. And Naruto is stronger than you. Riser drew back his arm as rage once again overtook him. Why was everyone so defiant? He was the one who was in the right here. Everything he did just showed his strength, showed that he had the power to protect his sister and his fiancée. He'd worked so hard practicing magic from childhood and working with his peerage to become stronger still. His parents focused on his older siblings, leaving him and Ravel to take care of themselves, if you can count leaving them with dozens of loyal servants as fending for themselves. When he'd gotten engaged, it had just made him work all that harder. He didn't want the power, he needed it. He'd seen the strength of those his brother faced in the raiding game, and he worked to be able to defend all he cared about from those who would take it away. Power meant everything, without it you couldn't defend anything, so he'd sought it and worked to earn it. Now why was everyone acting like he was the bad guy? Where did he go wrong? Why couldn't anyone see he was doing this for them? With a brutal roar, he thrust his flaming arm into the knight's chest, causing her to disappear in a flash of light. Naruto's knight is retired, came the announcement. Turning, Riser turned to look at where he knew his foe, his rival, stood waiting. Why didn't you interfere? He found himself almost growling the question. The boy responded with an almost casual shrug. She didn't want me to. She saw me, and if she had asked or desired it, I would have been there to drag you off of her in an instant. She chose to goad you. To anger you to the point of snapping. No matter what happens now, I win because in your current state your experience means nothing. Riser looked into the boy's eyes and could see the hatred he held for him reflected there. The boy had wanted, no needed to help his knight, but she had kept him from doing so with no more than a look over his shoulder. With a mad laugh, Riser grinned as he let the flaming wings sprout from his back. You wanted a one-on-one battle, well here it is, the immortal phoenix versus the son of a Satan. What better fight could an audience desire? Whoever wins gains everything, while the loser will lose what they desire and care for. If you want my sister, come and take her. His challenge was met with a cruel grin. You come to me, I won't move for those who are weaker than me. With a brutal roar that sounded more beast than man, Riser flew at the man. Naruto let out a self-satisfied grin. Well Sona, let's see if your plan works. As Riser drew back his right arm for a brutal swing, Naruto raised his left hand to meet him. As the blow came forward, Naruto said the words of the spell he'd spent the last week developing with the help of Rias and Grayfia. Absolute zero. In her seat in the student council room, Sona let a small grin flirt across her face. This was a move only he could do. One that no one else, except maybe his brother, would ever be able to cast. If Naruto needed a way to fight the healing flame, then this was the way to do it. It had surprised her when she'd received a call from him via magic circle the day after he and the two peerages had left for training. She could still recall the conversation. Flashback. Is there any way to remove the phoenix's flames? Naruto had bluntly asked her. Sona sighed. She'd been expecting the question, but she was sure he'd already asked Grayfia. Her answer likely wouldn't be any different. You can use holy objects, they tend to work. Holy water causes their flames to go out of control to the point they do nothing. Burns from crosses and wounds from holy swords only heal through the application of a healing sacred gear or regular recovery over time. None of those will be of use to you since you're also a devil. Naruto, honestly, I don't know how you can beat him. Well, could I freeze him? Freeze him to the point his flames won't activate? Naruto had asked hopefully. Grayfia had said no, but from the praise his aunt heaped on the student council president, Naruto could only hope that she had an idea. His hopes died with a sigh. It is possible, theoretically. The regeneration of a phoenix relies on the movement of atoms. Even as supernatural beings, we still are made of the same atoms as everything else in the universe, and atoms at 273.15 degrees Celsius don't move. But even Grayfia can't reach that low. It's impossible, Sona said. Your current lowest temperature isn't even halfway there. You can't reach absolute zero right now, and even if you one day surpass your mother, who I'll remind you is considered the strongest queen, you'll likely never be able to get your ice that low. What if we found a shortcut or another way to reduce the temperature? Naruto said, grasping at straws. It might be possible, Sona admitted grudgingly. But what could remove the energy in an atom? Back to present. That's impossible, even Grayfia-chan can't reach absolute zero. Serafal said, mouth agape, as the three sat with their families, who all seemed equally shocked at the sight on the screens in front of them. Indeed, but he wasn't just using my magic. Grayfia said. She'd known what Naruto had thought of, and while she had admitted it was possible, she honestly hadn't thought her son would be able to pull it off. He combined out abilities. Sirzechs realized, instead of just empowering his power of destruction to destroy more, he made it more precise. He used it to destroy the movement of the atoms, the very source of Phoenix's flame. There is literally no energy to produce heat or allow the atoms to move and reproduce. Riser is trapped, and there is a good chance that we wouldn't even be able to pull him out of there without Naruto ending the spell. Sirzechs explained as fatherly pride burned within him. Is that even possible? Riaz asked as she watched with shock. Obviously it is, her mother added, equally flabbergasted. Naruto just did it. To think he would possess this much power within a year of learning who he was, Zeodicus added, stroking his goatee. Even if he practiced his abilities in secret while he was with the humans, to be able to pull something like this off, he trailed off. There was no need to continue, as everyone's attention returned to the screen as Naruto approached the frozen statue that had been his foe. Riser had frozen the second his fist touched Naruto's palm. In less than a second, the combination of Naruto's two inherent powers had flown through his body, freezing and destroying the movement of the very atoms that made up the sack of flesh that was Riser Phoenix. His entire body was off the floor courtesy of the wings he'd used to launch himself at Naruto, and only a few pillars of ice that Naruto had set up to catch him had kept Riser from falling and shattering on the ground. If that had happened, he could have very well died, and there likely would have been no revival for him this time. But the calm that came from having complete control over a situation, Naruto strode around his floating foe, taking in his handiwork. Then with almost delicate precision, he coated his pointer finger with the power of destruction and severed the outstretched arm at the elbow where it fell and shattered on the ground. That was for Yui and what you did to her at the kendo club. Moving to his other arm, which was hanging bent at Riser's side, Naruto repeated the process, severing it at the elbow. And that was for what you did to Kaori. Striving to stand in front of Riser's frozen face, Naruto lowered his finger so it was right in front of Riser's forehead. I could kill you right now. If I move my hand forward or let my power spread, I could kill you, and no one would be able to stop me. It's tempting, oh it's so very tempting. With one movement, one moment of letting loose, I could avenge Yui and keep Riaz from ever having to worry about you again. Naruto let the possibility hang there for a few seconds, which to the world watching could very well have been hours. Then Naruto pulled his hand back and dispersed the power on his finger. But I think it would be crueler to take what I can from you, to show you that despite you trying to mess up our lives, my peerage and I are stronger than you. If I can defeat you with only 3 pieces, imagine what I can do with a full set. When that day comes, I want to face you again in another raiding game. If you can hear me, little firebird, know this, I hate you. I hate you for what you did to me and those I care for. But I will not let my hate consume me. I'm going to enslave and use it instead. People who say hate's bad are stupid. Hate is a motivator, nothing more, nothing less. Use your hatred of me and this defeat to motivate you, and when we face each other again, I'll beat you without using this attack. Until next time, little firebird. With a wave of his hand, Naruto dispelled the spell on Riser, whose stumps immediately burst into flames as he cried out in shock at the sudden wounds on his body. Then in a blue flash he was gone, and the voice of the Satan Beelzebub rang out, although this time there was a hint of emotion in his voice. Riser Phoenix has been retired. Naruto Gremory is the winner of the raiding game. After the announcement, a blue light flashed and teleported the victor away. If Naruto had wanted to make a debut, he'd certainly done it. He'd beaten the immortal Phoenix overwhelmingly, and in the process showed the entire world that he could literally freeze hell over if he so desired. When Naruto reappeared, he found himself in what appeared to be a penthouse suite based on the large living space in perfect condition, as well as the unused bedroom and bathroom he could see through a pair of French doors on his left. What really gave away the high class of the place though were the windows that looked out on a purple sky, indicating it was evening in the underworld, while providing Naruto with the best view, bar none, of the stadium where professional raiding games were held. His grandfather had taken him to see a professional game, while Naruto had spent a weekend with his grandparents, and Naruto had been thoroughly impressed of the power shown by Roygun Belphegor and Rudiger Rosenkreutz, as well as their respective peerages. Seeing the number 2 and number 9 in action truly showed Naruto how far he still had to go if he wanted to be the strongest. Turning around, Naruto saw a man, clearly waiting for him, in a brown suit who bowed to the young king respectfully. "Young master, allow me to be the first to congratulate you on your victory. Your family is very proud and have arranged a question and answer session in an hour for reporters." After your victory over Lord Riser in the raiding game, they plan to use this opportunity to formally introduce you to the underworld alongside your current peerage. Until the interview begins, I am to accompany you and serve as your guard and servant. Do you have any questions?" Having delivered his message, the man looked up at Naruto, awaiting instructions to see his young master wearing an annoyed scowl. "Beowulf, you're my father's pawn. You may need to address me like that in front of others, but when we're by ourselves you can call me Naruto." After all, Naruto couldn't even finish before the now named Beowulf cut the king off by prostrating himself on the floor, his head actually touching the ground while he knelt on his knees. "Forgive me, young master, but that is an order none of us who serve under Lord Sirzechs and Lady Grayfia will ever follow." The man cried in a voice layered with self-hatred and despair, a tone Naruto had heard multiple times before from those that served his father. "You are the child of our beloved master and his queen, yet we failed both them and you. They forgave us long ago just as you have, but in the end we were overconfident. Believing that we truly were the strongest peerage in the underworld as countless others call us, we let a single fallen steal you away from your parents while you were under our care. It's because of us you grew up not knowing your true family, and it was only through sheer luck that you were able to find each other. Our failure is the greatest dishonor any of us have ever suffered, and now that you have been reunited, those of us in Lord Sirzech's peerage would rather die than allow history to repeat itself. You are our young master, the one that we lost but failed to find. Please grant us the chance to redeem ourselves now that you have returned." Naruto sighed at the man still prostrated before him. This was not the first time he'd had this conversation with a member of his father's peerage, but it always went the same way, with them begging Naruto to let them serve him so they might be given a chance at redemption. Naruto didn't personally understand the need, seeing as how both he and his parents had forgiven them, but to the peerage members, it was a far more personal matter. When he'd brought it up with his father, Sirzechs had merely sighed, saying, "Let them do as they want. When Grayfia and I had to return to our duties, they kept searching for you. Now that you're back, they feel the need to earn the honor they failed to get in finding you by keeping you safe instead. Humor them for now, and if it becomes a problem later I'll deal with it." With a groan, Naruto had given in, and ever since he'd had to deal with being called young master, not just as his grandparents' mansion, but by his father's trusted servants. Additionally, he was probably the most well-protected member of the Grimory family when it came to the power of his guards. When he was in the underworld, he always seemed to be accompanied by a member of his father's peerage looking for danger wherever he went. Focusing on his priorities, Naruto turned to face his father's servant. "Take me to my pieces," he ordered. With a silent bow, the man extended his hand and summoned a magic circle the two moved to stand on. Within a moment they were gone. Barry appeared not in a hospital as Naruto had been expecting, but rather inside what seemed to be a clothing shop, if the mannequins in various medieval styles of dress were to be believed. Looking around, Naruto saw his three peerage members surrounded by various staff measuring, modeling, and judging while his grandmother supervised it all. "No, no, no." Venelana Grimory said, shaking her head as she looked at a necklace a shop assistant was locking around Kaori's neck. "She has brown hair and gold eyes. Why in the underworld would a green emerald be the accessory you choose? Use some amber, I'm sure there's some around here somewhere." "Ah, Naruto, I'm glad to see you're here. Tell me, do you think Kium should wear a ruby or a blood diamond?" Naruto, unsure of himself and what was happening for that matter, stepped forward to look at the two pieces. The red stones shimmered as they refracted the light. Looking up, Naruto tried to imagine the pieces around his pawn's neck, but they didn't seem to fit her innocent personality that hid a more mature hidden persona. Turning, he caught sight of the amber necklace an assistant was only now taking to Kaori, but something about the piece caught the king's eye. "Stop," he ordered, causing the assistant to freeze in their tracks, and though he hid it, Naruto thought he sensed a slight aura of fear from the man. Strolling up, Naruto pulled out the necklace, holding it at eye level so he could examine the piece closely. "Ah, an eye for jewelry, I see, Lord Grimory." A small, balding, pudgy man quickly strolled over, sensing a potential sale. "That's a fine piece made from ancient sap that grows only in the underworld." Its raised hand cut the man off abruptly as Naruto strolled over to his pawn and hung it around her neck, to the surprise of not only Kium but also his grandmother, knights, and quite a few of the staff, although the latter, remembering their imminent deadline, quickly got back to work. "That's for you," Naruto said, stepping back to admire the small golden bead that hung from his pawn's neck. "But Naruto, I have two pieces here that would bring out her hair color," Venelana complained, blowing out her cheeks as she pouted. She wanted to spoil her grandson's girlfriends, even if they weren't lovers yet, but Naruto was ruining the fun. "Sorry," Naruto said in a voice that meant he clearly wasn't, "but those don't suit Kium. She's not a fighter, she's a supporter who relies on others just as they rely on her." "But why amber?" Venelana said, clearly wanting a reason why her ideas were so quickly rejected. "Abba-san, blood diamonds are diamonds that originate from areas of conflict, and rubies are all about passion. They'd look nice on her, but this amber hides something inside, just like she does." Confused, Kiyomi lifted the piece around her neck to examine it more closely, while Naruto walked towards his grandmother, who was still standing next to the 2 boxes she'd wanted her grandson to choose from. "There's a scale in here." The brown-haired drill head yelped in surprise. Rushing over, Venelana looked closely at the piece. Inside the golden stone there was indeed the small red scale of some sort of reptile. "Yeah, the red reminded me of Mia's scales. I know that she was your first contracted monster, so I figured that a red scale would be fitting as your first piece of jewelry from me," Naruto said sheepishly, hand behind his head. The switch from cold king to awkward but lovable teenager threw the staff at the store for another loop. They couldn't connect the brown-haired blushing boy whose pawn was now hanging from his neck in a hug that pressed her rather impressive bosom into his chest with a man that had taken down the favored riser Phoenix with a single spell. Seeing them frozen, the daughter of the Bale house closed her eyes and smiled. Anyone in the area that wasn't Naruto Gremory or his servants felt the cold hands of death pass over them, causing the staff to leap back into action once again. After Kiyomi was dragged away by Venelana to try on some dresses, Naruto turned to his 2 knights that were glaring down at him, even as measuring tapes judged the sizes of every part of their body. Ignoring their glares, Naruto went over and looked at the blood diamond and ruby necklaces that his grandmother had wanted him to look at. They were beautiful, Naruto would readily admit, but something about them just didn't seem to fit his current peerage members. With a snap, Naruto called over the pudgy owner, and after a moment of whispered discussion, Naruto strode over to his knights, while the other man picked up the 2 boxes and hurried away. "So are all of you feeling alright? What happened after you retired?" Naruto asked, trying but failing to hide the note of concern in his voice. His moment of weakness caused the 2 girls to glance over at each other before they turned back, their expressions softening slightly as they faced their master. "Well, I was retired first," Yui began. "When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. The doctor told me that I was hardly injured. I was retired the moment the explosion went off. They gave me a phoenix tear just to be safe, and then they let me go." Kiyomi had already been retired and was waiting outside the door with your grandmother, Lady Gremory. Apparently all of Ria's pieces had already been healed and she'd taken them with her to go watch the game with your family. Your parents by that point had decided to reveal your identity formally after the game, but Lady Gremory decided our looks weren't, how'd she put it, worthy of our position serving as Satan's heir. "Next thing we knew, we're here and Kaori was brought in about 10 minutes ago," Yui said, finishing her report. Naruto chuckled internally. His grandmother was one of the kindest devils he knew, but when it came to girl talk, dresses, and makeup, she became a monster worthy of rivaling Aphrodite herself. Apparently Rias hadn't been a fan of those kinds of mother-daughter bonding activities growing up, often choosing instead to hang out with Sona and Naruto's cousin Sirzechs. However, now that Naruto had brought her teenage girls that couldn't say no, he knew his grandmother would do everything she'd previously been denied whenever she could steal them away. Naruto's other knight flashed him an unknowing shrug. "I'm pretty much the same, except I was a little more injured due to Riser sticking a flaming hand through my chest, but I was retired before I suffered any serious damage. I came to and was brought here by Beowulf to play dress up." All the girls knew the servants of Naruto's father, having been formally introduced to his peerage when he checked in on their progress during the training week along with his servants. "Do you know what's going on after this?" Naruto asked, needing to know what they'd been told. "Yeah, some kind of interview, right?" Kaori remembered. "Something like that," her king sighed. "Before notable rating games, it's common for both peerages to be questioned by reporters. Questions can be anything from strategies that'll be implemented to any new skills, although it's not uncommon to be questioned about peerage life or what services you carry out in the name of your king. This allows strong peerages to show a glimpse of the effort and training they put in to inspire others, although it's also used for gossip tabloids about relationships within the peerage. The reporters will likely target me since I'm the center of attention after what happened, but you girls should also be expecting some questions, since you're my servants. If you get nervous or if there's a question you don't want or know how to answer, just look at me." Kings are able to refuse to answer a question in the interest of themselves or their peerage. As Naruto watched his knights visibly relax, the owner of the shop came back gasping for air as he held 2 small boxes out to the Gremory lord. "Here are the items you requested, my lord," he wheezed out. With a small chuckle, Naruto took the offered boxes and after sneaking a peek walked over to his knights that were looking at the pair curiously. "For you, my ladies," he said with an exaggerated bow as he offered them the boxes. Sharing a look, the 2 knights picked up their respective box and opened it only to gasp in shock. Each box contained a pair of earrings. Yui's were deep pink that brought out the lighter shade of her hair, while Kaori's were a dark blood red that paired well with her maroon locks and golden orbs. "Since you 2 are always running around as my knights, I didn't want you girls to have a necklace or a bracelet you'd need to take off when fighting," Naruto explained. "So I figured a pair of earrings would be something that you could carry around with you. I choose ones that I thought would look good and that reflect your personalities." He turned to Yui. Yui tried to play matchmaker for Kaori and I when she thought we were both human, so I thought pink diamonds which reflect romance, creativity, and love would suit her well. As for you Kaori, he said as he turned to his first knight who switched her gaze from her friend's jewels to her master. You were born from blood, he paused looking at the ground as the memories came forth unhindered, so I thought a blood diamond would suit you. Their mind in areas of conflict and seeing as how you came to me through blood and now fight to draw blood as my knight, I thought it was an appropriate analogy. The girls looked at each other and then with matching motions, picked the offerings up and put them in their ears. Thank you Naruto, they chorused. Indeed thank you Naruto, a dark chuckle sounded from behind the king who froze like he'd used absolute zero on himself. Turning he plastered a grin on his face that failed to hide the fear he felt within. Standing before him was his grandmother who smiled at him with her eyes closed. Naruto gulped as the air above her head seemed to take the shape of the Grim Reaper. Naruto could almost see the cloaked skeleton pulling its thumb across its throat in the universal symbol of you're dead. Kiam managed to sneak out from behind the daughter of Bale's back and make her way over to the knights, who were wisely stepping away from their master, along with the rest of the staff. For what? Naruto managed to squeeze out. That was clearly a mistake as the aura darkened and the Reaper became almost tangible. For giving them such thoughtful and personal gifts. With her eyes still closed, Benelana's smile grew even darker as shadows came from nowhere to partially conceal her face. Now that you have there's no way they'll take anything I get them. The girls opened their mouths to argue, but Benelana continued ignoring them completely. They might accept them, sure, but they won't have the same personal connection as your gifts. All I can get them now is dresses and even then only one at the moment due to the deadline. There was clear emphasis on the dead part. Naruto was shaking as his panicked mind raced for a way to get out, to survive the situation he found himself in. He seized upon the first though he had, wait I won the rating game, so I'm going to be getting new peerage members soon. A head tilt was all the encouragement Naruto needed as he rambled on, why don't you take all of them out for a girls' night out after they're traded to me? You can even take Ria's, maybe even Akeno and Kaneko if you want. The oppressive aura lessened, and it looked like Benelana was considering it, but what if Ria's and her girls don't want to come? She asked although the question didn't carry the same aura of you're more screwed than a man after his wife finds him in bed with her sister that her previous statements had possessed. Then I'll trick her into going, Naruto pleaded. No, begged the Shinigami that was his grandmother. I'll say that she's been called to the underworld with her peerage for some Gremory air business. She'll go and I'm sure you can find something for Kiba to do, the maids love him. Damn that pretty boy devil Naruto cursed internally although he didn't let it show. Okay, the aura of death disappeared behind Benelana's cheerful attitude. Everyone blinked at the 180 but didn't dare to comment. It took everything Naruto had to not collapse onto his knees. Women were fucking terrifying, but damn are they hot, Naruto reminded himself. Although, Naruto gulped as his grandmother strode up to him. We only have 20 minutes before the interview and you still need to get changed. Naruto looked down at his suit which was covered in burns and cuts. Yes ma'am, he whispered softly, resigned to his fate. As he was dragged off he could see his peerage giving him sympathetic eyes, although they made no move to help him. Looking towards Beowulf, Naruto shot him a look that said, aren't you supposed to protect me? The brown-suited man only chuckled as he shot him a look that Naruto took to mean, even I can't fight that monster, mate. As a door closed separating him from the others, Naruto could only whimper at what the future held for him. Naruto nervously tugged at his collar as he followed his grandmother and Beowulf towards the room the interview would be held in. Following him was Kaori on his right and Yui on his left with Kiam walking in his blind spot. The knights were dressed in beautiful strapless black dresses that ended just above their knees. They were open on the back and slits on the sides ran from the bottom of the dresses to halfway up their thighs, allowing the knight more movement. Kiam wore a rich red velvet dress that stopped halfway between her knees and feet but had the same slits from mid-thigh down. Hers came with a black capelet of the same material which hung on her right shoulder, partially concealing the upper part of her arm and ended just above her elbow when her arms were resting at her side. Naruto on the other hand was dressed the same as he had been for the rating game, although all the clothes were new. The only main differences were that his black blazer with the Gremory sigil on his breast pocket was done up halfway, although his undershirt had the top buttons undone. His capelet was gone too, although the golden chain hadn't been wasted and now hung around Naruto's neck, giving him a rebellious air that worked well with his unruly hair and clear disregard for buttons at his neck. The group stopped in front of a pair of double doors, although voices could be heard on the other side. Then Alana turned taking in her grandson and his peerage, while Beowulf held the door handles, ready to throw them open at a moment's notice. Nodding her head satisfied with their look she turned to Naruto, this is your first step into politics Naruto, are you ready? From this moment on everything you say and do reflects not only on your father or the Gremory clan, but also on Devil Society as a whole. Not only are you a Satan's son, but you are also the heir of the de facto leader of the Devils. You have the power to cause a war with a careless word or an engagement with a look at the wrong person. Once you go through these doors there's no going back, everyone will be focused on you, so I need to know now, are you ready for this? Naruto took a deep breath as his mother's lessons flashed through his mind. He thought about his aunt, his father and mother. He thought about Milikas and Ravel. He thought about his peerage and everything that had changed within the last few months. Was he truly ready for all this? The hand on his shoulder caused him to turn to his right, where he saw Kaori give him a smile, a hand on his left, and a turn of his head allowed him to see Yui doing the same. Ag, no fair. Kium complained as she wrapped her hands around his neck and hung there against his back. Although Naruto couldn't see her he knew that she was pouting. That's right, he had people he could rely on, and he would only get more over time. Removing Kium from his neck with his hands, Naruto turned to his grandmother who had watched unmoving. Naruto took a deep breath and nodded at her. Venilana didn't say anything, merely turning to Beowulf who threw the doors open and stepped through, followed by Venilana and then Naruto and his peerage. For a blessed moment at their appearance there was silence, allowing Naruto to pause and take in the large crowd of reporters. To his surprise he recognized a few as representatives of the press for the Grigori, Heaven, and quite a few pantheons. Then the blinding flashes of light and raised voices came as the reporters overcame his sudden appearance and started shouting their questions at him. Ignoring them all, Naruto calmly strode over to the table that was set for him and his peerage with name cards indicating where they should sit. Naruto sat on the far side, furthest from the door they'd entered, with Kaori, Yui, and Kium in that order sitting from his left side to the door. There was a speaking post to Naruto's right, behind which stood the man who'd be conducting the interview, Nod Gamijin, a popular announcer in the underworld media. To Nod's right sat Riser and his peerage, all of which looked healed, although Riser had a haunted look in his eyes and seemed to tremble slightly upon catching sight of Naruto. His peerage was spread out in order of rank, with Yubaluna on his right and the others scattered out in order of their piece importance. Ladies and gentlemen, Nod began, his voice carrying over the reporters shouting, getting them to quiet down. I am Nod Gamijin, and it is my pleasure to host the post-game interview for the rating game between Riser Phoenix and Naruto Lucifuge Gremory. Now I'm sure there are many questions, but before we begin, the victor is due his rewards. Lords Naruto and Riser, will you please step forward? Hearing his name called, Naruto stood up and stepped out to stand in front of the podium in an inactive magic circle. Riser mimicked Naruto's movements, although he was clearly reluctant to do so, his trembling only worsening the closer he got to the Satan Sun. Now, for those of you that do not know, Lord Naruto expressed an interest in trading for one of Lord Riser's bishops, his little sister Ravel to be precise. The two had been friends for quite a while and expressed a mutual interest in the trade. Ravel went to meet with her brother, who promptly refused, saying that Lord Naruto was unworthy of her. He then challenged Naruto to a rating game with Ravel as the prize should Lord Naruto win. If he lost, Lord Naruto was to cease his friendship with Lady Ravel immediately. Lord Riser also offered to trade a piece of Lord Naruto's choice, in addition to his sister, should Lord Naruto win. As Nod finished explaining the origin of the fight between the two kings, Naruto flashed a grin at Ravel, who was almost hopping up and down in excitement. Her eyes were locked onto Naruto's as they'd been since Naruto had entered the room. Now, Lord Naruto, would you please tell us who the second piece you would like to take from Lord Riser? Focusing back on what was happening, Naruto turned his gaze from Ravel to the rest of Riser's peerage. A few of the girls sat up straighter under his gaze, but only a few caught his attention. First was Riser's queen Yubaluna, who'd been able to overcome Akeno, and after studying tapes of Riser's fighting, Naruto knew that she would make for a powerful ally. However, she was a queen and Naruto still held out hope that he'd be able to get someone with a more powerful talent or skill. His next pick was the rookie'd fraud Isabella. She was smart, smarter than her king at least, and was a competent fighter from what Naruto had seen during his research. The only problem was that while she was a talented rook, she didn't really have any specialization, and he'd have to cultivate her talent if he wanted her to be a valuable piece. The last piece he considered was a pawn dressed in a dancer bikini similar to those worn in the Middle East. While he had no proof, he suspected that she had a sacred gear, as several times in the films her opponents had seemed to go into a daze when they saw her. Although he conceded that may be due to her choice of outfit. After a minute of silence, Naruto spoke loud and clear, I choose the rook Isabella as my second piece. Hearing her name called, Isabella looked up at Naruto shocked, while he merely flashed her an arrogant smirk and a wink. With the grin of a man used to milking the audience, Nod merely smiled as he called for Ravel and Isabella to step forward and stand in the middle of the magic circle. They stood in front of Riser facing Naruto, while Naruto called forth his evil pieces, setting in front of him a rook and a bishop. As he stepped back, he looked at Riser and nodded. The once formidable Phoenix King took a step back in response. At the command of Nod, the two kings raised their right hands, arms outstretched towards the other, while the circle in front of them with their pieces within came to life. In unison the two kings began to flare their power, increasing their aura, the magic circle glowing in response. As the reporters watched silently, knowing the importance of the ceremony, the symbols began to move and the auras of the kings and their pieces became visible. Riser's was reddish-orange, silently popping and crackling like the flames his family ruled over. Naruto's on the other hand was a mixture of two colors. The ice blue of his mother's family flowed and intertwined with the crimson red he'd inherited from his father. Their pieces glowed the same color as their respective kings, and to the observant a faint link could be seen between going from the king to their pieces, showing the connection between them. As the auras of the kings grew even stronger, the connection between the pieces and their king seemed to shake, as if the connection was trying to break itself off. With one last push the kings pushed their auras all the way. Around Riser the air seemed to heat up, while around Naruto, it seemed to cool and hum with power. The connections jerked and thrashed, once, twice, 3 times, and with an audible snap it broke. For a moment the 4 pieces were alone, connected and bound to no one before. With a whipping crack, the connection jerked towards the nearest source of power. Naruto's unused bishop and rook latched onto Riser's power, and his aura began to surround them. Ravel's and Isabella's connection did the same, connecting to Naruto their own auras that began to glow in interwoven crimson and ice blue. As the ceremony completed itself, the two kings stepped back, each taking deep breaths, although Riser's were more of a pant, while Naruto sounded like he was recovering after giving a quick rant. Silently Riser's former pieces strode to stand behind Naruto, turning when they faced their former master. Riser ignored them and walked forward, picking up the red rook and bishop. He thrust them into his pocket before he strode back to his seat, throwing himself upon it with a huff. Naruto meanwhile turned to look at his 2 new pieces, giving them a quick once-over to make sure they were in good health. He whispered a quick, "We'll talk later," before he walked back to his seat, 2 new chairs magically appearing for his pieces. Ravel was seated to Naruto's left where Kaori had sat, while Isabella was between Yui and Kium. Once they were all sitting down, Naruto leaned back in his chair and popped his feet on the table in front of him. "Well," he said with a devilish smirk, "let's get this show on the road." This was part 2. I would be happy if you guys leave a like and subscribe to my small channel. I would be more happy if you guys leave your favorite character name from Naruto Shippuden in the comment box. Let's see which character has the bigger fan